Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is the boy in the team in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 51, Yearning the Truth. The base was quiet. His steps on the ceiling carried him without a sound all the way to a set of double iron doors. Wolf was working on the lock, while Cat and Dog stood guard. He tapped the ceiling thrice, loud enough for Cat's ears to pick up. The Umbu raised his head and met his own mask, before giving a light shake of the head as if to snort, and signed the all right to Dog. Dog and Wolf were women. From his spot on the ceiling, he wouldn't have suspected it at all. Their hair cut short, barely spiky. It made it difficult to grab. Wolf stopped after a few seconds of tinkering, giving the thumb up. Cat and Dog moved to the sides of the door. Shinku took a deep breath, before nearing from the ceiling. The moment the door opened, he shunshined inside, sticking his feet to the ceiling and quickly gazing around for possible threats. There was a soft sniffling sound from a corner, where a dark teal cover seemed to hide something alive and moving. Assessing the other possible threats, Shinku narrowed his eyes at the sight of spiky dark hair hiding behind a counter. He crept closer, not stepping into the dim lights that occupied the ceiling. If he didn't cast a shadow, the man wouldn't see him. Wolf entered first, quickly dashing towards the nearest cover and hiding there. The man seemed to tense, before apparently gripping something from her chest. It was a woman. Badly mutated by whatever experiment Orochimaru had performed, she had a gaunt and withered complexion. She looked aged beyond belief, her skin wrinkled and her lips wretched. The moment Shinku's eyes saw the explosive tag, he thrust himself down as fast as he could, and slamming the kunai straight through the woman's brain, he killed her before she could even react. He gripped the tag with his other hand, tearing it in half before dropping the body on the ground. "Mom!" The meek voice of a girl reached Shinku's ears, before he flickered back on the ceiling. Cat tensed from his spot, now hiding behind a pillar of the wall. There weren't other doors around the area, so unless they were hidden it meant they'd probably have to retrace their steps. The sheets moved slightly, to reveal a scraggly and ill-kept face. "Mom!" The child, barely 10, screamed in fear as she neared the dead corpse. She had what looked like half of a horn sticking out of the left side of her face, and her right arm appeared a bit bigger than her left one, covered in a sort of chitin membrane. The dark-haired girl gripped tightly on the sides of the dead woman, before Shinku gave a quick gaze towards Wolf. Wolf shook her head. Shinku gazed at Cat. Cat shook his head. Dog awkwardly nodded. He exhaled, before tapping on the radio. "We're too even on possible hostage rescue," he whispered on the radio. "Girl, barely 10, mutated. She does appear sane. We might have just killed her parents, probably." "Joy," Baku grumbled. "She might know something. I say rescue." "Ah, why yes. She might need help," Dragon warily said. Shinku gave a sort of triumphant look that was all in the neck movement, since he had a mask on, towards Wolf, who gave him the middle finger back in reply. He gave the thumb up to Dog, who carefully stood up from her spot and removed her mask. Soft brown hair and hazel eyes appeared. "Hey," the woman said softly. The girl realized there was someone else in the room with her a moment later. Before she could scream, Shinku fell down once more and pushed down hard on the girl's neck, cutting the airflow until she nearly choked, losing consciousness. He let go of the hold a moment later, giving a curt nod to Dog, who placed the mask back on and proceeded to hoist the girl on her back. "Take her outside and have Dragon check on her," Shinku remarked, flexing his fingers. "You take point, bird," Wolf said. There were more than just 3 pairs of footsteps. Clearing out a building wasn't as easy as it seemed. Every door could yield a trap. Every wall could hide a secret tag. Behind a seemingly normal staircase, there could be a bomb or a ninja wire used to alert others. Taking point was just another way for Wolf to tell him to go to hell. Umbu was the tactics and assassination squad. Having an Umbu rescue someone? Well, yes, they did that occasionally. Killing the kidnappers counted, but taking care of a hostage was always a chore nobody wanted to do. Cat was mere inches behind him, scrupulously double-checking everything Shinku did along the way. It wasn't because he was bad at his job, but it was a part of the job. 2 pairs of eyes were better than one. Nick on the right, near the door. Kunai launcher. He had 3 pairs of eyes. He stopped, gesturing for the trap that Cat carefully began to work around. The point was that any trap that could activate also had the mean to deactivate nearby. It wouldn't make sense to place a trap somewhere and then let it always on. Unless you had another mean to enter the room, it simply wasn't done. A soft click, and the Kunau's launcher safety engaged. Cat nodded, giving the all clear. Shinku jumped on the ceiling. It was the bird trademark, to strike from the top. It was his trademark. The door slid open, revealing a set of tanks bubbling with green liquid and filled with floating corpses and twitching bodies. A loud coughing noise came from a corner, where a bunch of rags and sheets were on the ground for the sickly. The people still alive wheezed heavily when they could breathe, all of them mutated in some way and yet painfully half-human. Some had claws, tails, or sharp and crooked teeth that had shattered their otherwise human mandibles. They were a product of misery, and yet Shinku felt absolutely nothing at their sight. It wasn't the first lab he cleared, and the refuse of Orochimaru's experiments was never pretty to look at. The land of Rice had capitulated in a matter of weeks, but Orochimaru and his goons hadn't understood. A war that was meant to last no more than a few months became a long and harsh grind through the countryside looking for the Snake Sunin's bases, hideouts, hidden troops among the population. When fighting an enemy village, at least one could break their spirit. Orochimaru didn't care about his troops, and his men were blindly fanatic. Even in the throes of death, they still laid their lives down for him. He counted 6 sick figures, but he didn't know about the content of the tanks. From what he had heard from a fellow Umbu a few days before, some of the twitching actually meant they still were alive in there. Shinku gazed at Cat and made a tiger sign. Cat gazed at the bodies, at the coughing and the wheezing and gave him back a look. Shinku insisted on the tiger sign. Wolf gave a curt nod. Cat acquiesced, but pointed at the counters where papers were sparsely around. Shinku nodded, slowly gripping 2 kunau and letting a thin line of barbed wire cross through the holes in their handles. Cat silently made his way forward, crouching and walking on all fours as deftly as possible. There was little light in general, and as the coughing made Cat's steps even more difficult to hear, it was easy for the Umbu to grab all the salvageable and then head outside. He stepped out last, after carefully placing explosive tags over the ceiling and hiding them with a small and black piece of cloth. Sliding out of the door, he closed it softly behind him and primed yet another explosive on the handle. They quickly dashed out of the base. When the first tag detonated, soon followed by all of the others, the raging inferno killed everyone in the room and the tanks within mere instants. Shinku liked to think they didn't feel any pain as they died, and frankly it was better that way. There wasn't a cure for Orochimaru's seal, and all the sick people eventually ended up going mad with pain and rage, starting a murderous rampage that wasn't at all easy to deal with. The child was a more manageable option as a hostage. She also hadn't appeared as sick as the others. "We're taking her to forward camp," Wolf grumbled, gazing at the girl. "And then we leave her in the hands of the brainy folks." "What? Nobody wants to say it," Baku said, gazing at the base as it burned up. "We just destroyed the last base of Orochimaru in the land of Rice. The war is over. We finished it. Our team gave the final blow to Orochimaru." "There was nothing in there but sick people and garbage," Shinku grumbled, wiping a hand in front of him. "That's no end of the war. Orochimaru's head need to be on a pike near Konoha's gates, before we can call the war over. Thankfully it's the top brass decision to stop after this," Cat said with a thin smirking tone. "I can't wait to enjoy my time as a war hero. Think of the ladies that will flock over to my side when I tell them I was there, watching the last of Orochimaru's forces die." The girl." Dragon stammered out, "She's fine. For being a mutant freak." Wolf said. "Why no, I mean, she's fine." "Wait, if that's the case then the seal was applied only a few." Dog didn't finish her sentence. The Umbu's head, neatly severed from her shoulders, fell on the ground as blood sprayed thickly in the air. With a flash and a smoke cloud, the rest of the Umbu team disappeared. "Naughty, naughty children," Shinku's blood froze as he dropped another smoke bomb. "Trying to get away with something of mine." Orochimaru was there. Orochimaru, S-rank threat to run on sight unless you have 20 Umbu nearby, was there. The Snake Sunin haughtily laughed, before the sound of crashing trees reached Shinko's ears. "Baku's down, I've got the girl!" Wolf screamed. Shinko's heart didn't even skip a beat as he dropped the radio he carried on the ground near a proximity explosive tag. Few minutes later, and the tag did explode. Orochimaru knew the Kage Bunshin technique, his file said so. Orochimaru held the snake summon, his file said so. Orochimaru was not an enemy to be fought one-on-one, his file said so. The blood boiled. A blinding tag, a smoke bomb and an explosive tag all left Shinko's hands and dropped behind him in rapid succession. His feet carried him further away. They had a meeting point in case shit hit the fan, and that was where he headed. If he survived, or if any of the others survived, they'd all meet there. Down. He fell on the ground just as the metallic blade of Orochimaru's sword slid effortlessly in the air above him, slicing down trees thicker than a body with ease. "Take over." "No need to tell me." The snake Sunin gazed at him with an amused smirk. "Little Umbu-chan, don't try to run. If he's real, we're dead. If he's a clone, we've got a chance." Shinko ground his teeth. "Did they never teach you it's rude to steal?" Orochimaru continued. One-hand seal, a fireball and a volley of shuriken. A wall of rock came up, absorbing the brunt of the blow as Shinko dashed backwards, his hands gripping on a small round container. Kage Bunshin or Mud Bunshin. Mud Bunshin disappears after a fixed distance. This is a Kage Bunshin. We need to hit him only once, with anything. Orochimaru came at him with speed from the left side, sword poised to strike. A Kawarimi, and the Sunin sliced in half an explosive-riddled log that detonated soon afterwards. He saw that. We didn't get him. Shinko kept running. He had to make it to the meeting point. Orochimaru probably wouldn't pursue further. Orochimaru can move through the ground. Careful below. A fist came from beneath the ground, forcing Shinko to twist his body painfully as he avoided the blow and fell rolling on the ground. His hands gripped the soil as he hastily made a backflip, jumping back on his feet. "Would you please stop running?" Orochimaru said. "It is getting annoying. He's probably running short on chakra if he pursued each of us with a Kage Bunshin." Shinko substituted with a Bunshin, using the Shunshin to appear right behind the snake Sunin with his kunao ready to thrust. Orochimaru liked to toy with his opponent. This was in the file. The moment Orochimaru's hand gripped at his wrist, Shinko broke the round flask, letting the acid pour on his hand, and on Orochimaru's sleeve. The Kage Bunshin disappeared in a puff of smoke, and Shinko ran faster than he had even run before. He had just gained the advantage over the snake Sunin. Well, a Kage Bunshin of the snake Sunin actually, but the fact was the same as long as he got out of there before the real one came around. His hand's palm protection fizzled a bit, leaving behind a small dent on the steel, but apart from that and some blotches of red on his fingers, he was still alive. He didn't start to laugh maniacally, because Outer was laughing in the corner of his head for him. He flexed his legs, before diverting from the meeting point and heading straight for the forward camp. If Wolf still had Orochimaru on her tail, or if any of the others still had their own, then it would be meaningless to follow the protocol and rush ahead to his own death. Then again, knowing Wolf, she'd be heading straight for the main camp. Dragon was probably dead, just like Dog and Baku. Cat could have made it. He might have been faster than Orochimaru to begin with. Sure, they were members of the team, but Umbu had a mortality rate for a reason, and team members weren't fixed specifically because of it. They were all chosen for the job, they were all considered the best for the job, but it didn't mean the job was easy, or it would go without deaths. Of the team he had been the rookie in, he was the only survivor. The shackled creature growled. The sun was going down by the time he started to slow down. He didn't stop running, but he did slow down enough to take in his surroundings with more calm. There's an owl on that branch. A moment later, he had an owl on a kunao. Fire chakra poured through the weapon, burning at the bird from the inside out. At least remove the feathers. Grumbling, Inner did just that as he kept up his run across the branches. Dinner on the fly, he said. He chuckled a moment later. That's a nice one, isn't it? I hope it tastes like chicken, Outer mumbled. We lack salt and spices. It'll taste like burned pigeon. A bite later and Inner groaned. I want salt. Let's ask the quartermaster back at base if he has any, he mumbled. Maybe we can claim it's for a technique or something. The trees didn't reply. Inner snorted. Yeah? Like what? Melt the ice technique. What about, keep the water from icing, jutsu? I'm sure that would work. The moon was high by the time Shinka reached forward camp. Well, he called it camp but it actually was a small riverside village with brick houses. He caught his breath atop the rooftop closest to the camp, before jumping down and slamming his shoulder against the nearby wall. He carefully knocked thrice on the side of the door, keeping his body out of sight. It's late tonight, come back tomorrow, a voice grumbled half asleep. Anyone would have placed it as belonging to the old and grumbling shopkeeper of the nearby grocery store. I just need some fire, the night is cold. The door clicked open, and Shinka slid in. There were different levels of security to enter an Umbu safe house. Never remain in front of the door, knock a certain amount of times, say a specific code and once inside tap twice the side of your mask. Each safe house also had a more specific and week-changing code, which was usually delivered in groups of 4. If you were more than 1 month late on an assignment, you were probably dead anyway. Bird? The rest of the team. Complication. Snake alert. Send message. He's possibly still in the area, Shinka spoke quickly. Baku and Dog confirmed deceased. The man wearing the monkey mask stiffened, before rushing to his colleagues further in the safe house. Shinka walked towards the fridge, ignoring the mumbles of the other Umbu in the house. He opened the refrigerator, taking out a cold ice pack and holding it over his reddish fingers. He exhaled, before dropping it back in and taking out a bottle of water. He knew what was going to happen in less than 5 minutes, so he drank it down and gripped at the nearest protein bar. Owl tasted like hell, even worse than the cardboard taste milkshakes and jerky. Nobody in the room said a word. He was halfway through a package of jerky when the door opened. Bird, Team Mongoose is here. He nodded, and he was out as fast as he could. There weren't any words spoken. Team Mongoose was, aptly put, a 2-man team. It was made of the only 2 people who could battle Orochimaru to a draw or defeat him. Jiraiya of the Sunin and Minato Namikaze. He stood to attention in front of the Hokage for barely an instant, before starting to run back in the direction he had last seen Orochimaru's clone. It wasn't that he didn't want to talk about why Naruko had stopped answering his letters, or if he could get leave or how Fu was or things like that. The fact was, he didn't see a need for it. Time was of the essence. He'd deal with the rest of his problems when the time came, but as it was he had a duty to uphold. He had to see that snake impaled on the ground in one way or another, and there really wasn't another swifter way than this. He owed it to Bear and the others of his first Umbu team. Minato Namikaze watched the back of Operative Bird for a split second, before returning to gaze at his surroundings. The Umbu looked comparatively young, but he hadn't gazed at his file. Whenever someone called the snake alert, he dropped everything and summoned both himself and Jiraiya to the safe house where the alert was. The high ration was useful for that. He did wonder for a brief moment if the bird operative in front of him was Shinku, but he couldn't ask. Umbu could not remove their mask and state their names until they finished their service. Still, if it was Shinku, he'd have to ask him a very important question. Why did he stop writing back? Chapter 52, of Everyday Life and Homecomings. Naruko Namikaze delivered 1 letter to the shinobi courier every day, without a fault. Even if she hadn't received an answer back in 3 years, she still dutifully sent a letter each day telling what she had done the day before. Sasuke was simply a sourpuss who thought that it was useless, and that they should simply wait for Shinchan to come back and then interrogate him with the liberal use of genjutsu, but she thought otherwise. After delivering the letter, her daily routine began. Her clones went around the village, they went in the library, they studied techniques, and they perfected taijutsu movements or practiced ninjutsu. She trained in the Hokage's mansion gym. Methodically, without a fault, without a moment of silence, she trained. She had a Kage Bunshin follow around Sasuke when he had free time, because she didn't have free time. They were still at war, and she had to show off she was working hard. She knew how to work hard, she always did. She had been unable to write letters to Fu, because during war there was the risk of the normal mail being intercepted and shinobi couriers only worked for deliveries from the front lines to the village and vice versa until peacetime. Plainly put, until the mid-afternoon came when her clones would start dispersing one after the other, delivering their notions to her, she did nothing but train and keep her mind away from various thoughts. One of the most dangerous ones was also the one she wished desperately wasn't true. Sure, her father had told her, repeatedly, that no notification of Shinku dying had been forwarded, but it didn't mean anything. Maybe he was dead, and nobody realized it because there were a lot of shinobi with bird masks on. She had wiggled out the mask from her father since breaching protocol meant shit to her when it came to her friends. Therefore, every day, Naruko Namikaze trained and tried to ignore the possible bad things that might have happened to Shinchan without someone keeping an eye on him. The only reason she hadn't gone to the front lines to look for him was simple too: she was putting off the confrontation. Because if he actually was ignoring her letters, if he actually wasn't answering back because of this or that reason, then nothing, because she clearly wouldn't start wailing like a child. She was 18 years old, she had a pair of perky voluptuous breasts and curves women would die for, and there was no way in hell Shinchan wouldn't want her as a friend. She stifled down a sniffle, and returned to her stretching. Everything was going to be fine. Suzuki Uchiha checked the mailbox every morning, before grumbling a little curse and heading off to the hospital. He was both a patient and a doctor, meaning he had the uncanny chance of seeing the world on both sides of the barricade. On one side, he treated patients proficiently and with care, kicking out the occasional fangirl or would-be wife. On the other side, he took a vast and different array of pills and medication designed to slow down the dripping of senjutsu chakra coming from the seal into his body. The slow trickle was nothing more than a single drop of chakra a day, and yet in 5 years it already had filled a cup's worth. His life expectancy had gone up by 2 more years, however, meaning he would survive until he was 27. The Uchiha's fan is red, he mumbled as he read yet another fangirl's postcard. The Uchiha's coat is blue, my one true love, that's just you. He shook his head in disbelief. Finally, he began his rounds around the hospital. He liked the geriatric section more than the others. The old ladies were kind grannies, and way over the menopause. He really didn't understand what girls saw in him. Sure, he was in his modest opinion a good catch, but was that enough of a reason to flirt? Clearly, they were probably enjoying it in their own way. His Mangekyou memory reminded him of that time Shinka was squirming with a sleeping Naruko nearby, and he chuckled at the good memory. Then, he remembered clearly the time he had discharged a young patient who had vowed to become a cool doctor like him. He remembered the hug of a little girl getting back on her feet after a broken foot. He remembered the funny jokes of the medical assistant, and with a bright smile etched on his features, Suzuki Uchiha walked through the white hallway. He was happy. "Na, Uchiwa-sama," a sultry voice whispered in his ear, "I need something for my bothersome warmth." Suzuki sighed. Leave it to Naruko to destroy any moment of pure bliss he stumbled upon. Dope. Ohi, Naruko grumbled, crossing her arms and pushing her chest upwards. Since she had discovered she now could do that, she did it every single time. Don't you want to snuggle your face in these babies? My beautiful Uchiha-sama. Cut it off before I cut those off, Suzuki retorted calmly. My poor babies, Naruko exclaimed, don't you dare frighten them. She proceeded to hug her breasts, shameless. You're really shameless, Yuki-chan. You know you can't follow me when I enter a patient's room, Suzuki deadpanned. Wait out here and be good. All right, Naruko grumbled. Suzuki entered the room, closing the door behind him as he grabbed the patient's medical chart. So, and that was when he froze. His eyes snapped immediately to the woman near the bed, and then to the child sitting on the border of the bed he used for exams. He made a strained smile. What seems to be the problem, madam? She's been having this cough and runny nose for a while, Mabuki Harano said, gazing at the child on the bed with concern. I don't really know what to do. The girl coughed. I'm sorry. It's not a problem, sweetie, Mabuki smiled warmly. Suzuki believed he would be justified if he used Amaterasu. He didn't, mostly because it was murder and traumatizing a child was not something he looked forward to. Maybe the woman hadn't realized who he was difficult, or maybe she had decided to feign ignorance. Let me have a look at you then. His right hand softly glowed green as he neared the girl's chest. Take a deep breath, he instructed her. The girl obediently did so. So, when did she start the symptoms? Sasuke asked, keeping his voice controlled. The woman turned thoughtful, before answering. A few months ago, but now it's just getting worse. It's allergy, Sasuke replied calmly. The cherry blossoms are in full bloom right about now, so she's probably allergic to their pollens. It's nothing to worry about. Sasuke scribbled down a prescription. He was inches away from suggesting a full-out invasive surgery on the woman, but stopped from writing it down. Really, he was easily riled up only when it concerned that stupid insensitive friend of his who had the guts not to write back. He was going to have a word with him, a long, Mangekyou-induced word. He bid the two goodbye, waving at Mai-chan, such was the name of the girl, before leaving and grabbing Naruko by the wrist to carry her to the next room, promptly empty, luckily. Hey. Yuki-chan. So rough. She moaned, I'm not ready yet. Shouldn't we tell something to our parents first? Come on. Stay here, he grumbled, crossing his arms over his chest as he blocked the doorway. Naruko's head inclined to the side. What are you trying to hide? Nothing, Sasuke replied. Absolutely nothing. So, Naruko sat down on the examination bed. You want to play the sexy doctor and the overly hot patient? Sasuke rolled his eyes. No. Naruko pouted. You mean it? The next moment, Naruko flashed towards the door only for Sasuke to form a mini Susanoo shield to hold her inside. Naruko's eyes narrowed. Very well, she acquiesced. Sasuke wasn't fast enough to stop her, and a hand seal later a clone appeared and puffed. Naruko smiled as Sasuke let the Susanoo's small shield disappear. Now, the girl crossed her arms behind her head. What was it you were hiding? You can tell me or I'll know eventually. I am protecting the privacy of the patient, Sasuke acquiesced. And his well-being while in the hospital. Naruko simply kept up her smile. 5 minutes later, and she walked off. Sasuke didn't even stop her. He had patients to take care of, and probably, one more would come around lamenting extreme rashes all over her body soon enough anyway. Shinku Harano, codenamed Bird, closed his eyes for a moment and slid Cat's eyes down. Orochimaru had ripped the man's heart cleanly. It appeared obvious that Baku had tried to grab the girl first, only for Orochimaru to stab him in the back before Wolf had begun her run with her. They had all headed in the same direction as Wolf to provide assistance, except him. He had followed orders. Now it was his turn to follow as Jiraiya of the Sunin and the Yondaime tracked down the trail. He sealed the corpses of the members of his team in one of his storage scrolls, and then pursued the 2 men of Team Mongoose. He probably would feel a twinge of something if Dragon died. Probably being the key term. She was the rookie, and a meek and stuttering girl at that. Have you had any previous encounters with Orochimaru, Bird? Yes, Hokage-sama, he replied dutifully. How many teammates did you lose? None, he remarked. Lucky brat, Jiraiya grumbled. Well, it seems the trail's gone cold. It's been a few hours at least, and the toads don't smell any snake nearby. Was there a meeting point for your team? Minato asked the Umbu, who gave back a quick nod. Let's head there first. Shinku obeyed, flickering in a shunshin and slamming his foot against the wooden branch before pushing his entire body forward. The meeting point was a rocky spot near a small river, easy to find in the mostly forest and fields land. Blood. Inner. I'm onto it. Blood ahead, he snarled out, palming his Kirigaku or Kunao. Minato couldn't forget it. He knew of only one shinobi in his forces that used such a weapon. He was about to call out to the Umbu in question, when the sound of battle reached his ears. Kaiten. A female voice barked out fast, as Dragon's body spun as fast as she could to deflect the attack. The wind bullets slammed against the chakra shield and, deflected, slammed into the ground nearby. Shinku halted on a branch, observing the scene from his vantage point. Dragon was alive, wounded, but alive. Wolf was there too, albeit on the ground and with a wide gash on her sides. Therefore, the woman hadn't gone towards the main camp. Most importantly, Orochimaru was still there. You've run to the end of your line, brat, the snake Sunin snarled. I'll have your eyes on a silver. The Yondaime and Jiraiya both nodded to one another, before disappearing in flickers of Shunshin. Minato's Hirae Shinku now covered a circle around the Snake Sunin, while Jiraiya unclasped and opened a scroll, before slamming it on the ground. Ink symbols and seals spread out across the ground, before lightening up in a flash and forming a barrier that completely trapped Orochimaru inside. "Hey there Orochi," Jiraiya said. "You done running away now?" Orochimaru of the Sunin snorted, "You think this is going to stop me?" "No," Minato acquiesced from outside the barrier, "but this is," and the Yondaime summoned a Kage Bunshin. "What makes you think I'm the real one anyway?" Orochimaru yelled, "I might be a Bunshin." "I'll take the risk," Minato said. "And if you are not the real one, then go ahead and disperse." Orochimaru spat to the side. "I am Orochimaru. I won't be defeated by a mere Kage Bunshin." Minato smiled, watching as the Kage Bunshin formed the Raise-Non in his hand. "I completed the Raise-Non, so you know," the Yondaime said. "Lightning cracked the surface of the Chakra Sphere, thanks to my daughter no less," he added. "You will find the barrier isn't there to contain you." The hair on the back of Shinku's neck rose as he felt his saliva fizzle in his mouth. "But to contain the power of this," and then, the Kage Bunshin with the completed Raiden Raise-Non appeared within the barrier thanks to the Hirae, and the detonation forced Shinku to avert his gaze as the ground cracked. Even though the barrier did hold, deadening the brunt of the attack, when the lightning was over, there was nothing remaining behind. Nothing except for the Kusanaga's blade. Charred, covered in smoke, but still there. Shinku didn't exhale in relief. He wanted a corpse. He needed a corpse. He couldn't believe this was it. It had been too fast. It had been too quick, too easy. Why toy with dragon and wolf all day? Why act like this? No, this wasn't possible and it didn't make any sense. Inner took care of scouting the surroundings, and so deep within the blood-soaked sands of his mind, outer was free to think. It's a trap. For what? What does Orochimaru gain from faking his death? With his death, doesn't this mean the war is over? And with the war over, the border's security would loosen up. With security down, he'd be able to leave for another country and... "Come on down, Bird-chan," Jiraiya said, waving his hand in Shinku's direction. "The danger is over." Bird inclined his head to the side, before flickering down on the ground. Dragon was panting hard, but dropped her guard when she saw Bird. Wolf tried to wheeze out something, but the Yondaime was fast enough to grip onto her and the girl she held before disappearing in a flicker of Hirae. "Well," Jiraiya said, gazing at the two Umbu. "You both saw Orochimaru kick the bucket, right?" "About that," Shinku began, only for Jiraiya to shake his head. "Yes, I know, this might all be one big move of his, but he left behind his sword," the Toad Sunin pointed at the Kusanagi, "and I'm going to have it shattered. So he might have escaped and faked his death, but the war is over and his sword will be destroyed. S-rank secret. Until he makes a blunder and shows himself once more," Jiraiya nodded. "Now let's head back." The Toad Sage began to walk at a leisurely pace. "Forward camp is that way, Jiraiya-sama," Shinku deadpanned, pointing in the opposite direction. Dragon remained frozen stiff where she was, unsure on what to do. "Yes," the Toad Sunin replied, stopping to gaze back at Shinku, "but Konoha is this way. We can't take leave without. OHI, I'm a Sunin, you know? I'm higher up on the military of Konoha and I say you two earned an early return home." Dragon gazed towards Shinku, who just acquiesced in the end. "Very well," he said, "you assume responsibility for whatever might happen." Yeah, stick up your ass that you are," humming, the Toad Sunin began to walk once again. Naruto Namikaze stopped writing letters every day and did one thing every morning after hearing that the war was over. She sat down, and wait, at the northern gate. A day later, Sasuke Uchiha did one thing every morning. He sat down, and wait, at the northern gate. The shinobi returning from the war trickled in one after the other in groups, or in small parties. The Umbu arrived at night, or during the middle of the day. Sasuke's eyes trailed over every bird-masked Umbu who looked sort of like Shinku would, but they all came short. Naruko hummed to herself in wait. She always hummed the same catchy tune, acting like a child ready to eat cotton candy. The fourth day, she stood up and began to stretch. Sasuke inclined his head to the side, but said nothing. The seventh day, when already Naruko had stopped doing stretches and had begun cracking her knuckles in weight, Jiraiya of the Sun-In returned home with 2 Umbu escorts. 2 extremely pissed off Umbu escorts, judging by how they both appeared to be barely holding their anger inside. It was just a friendly detour. Jiraiya bellowed, "See? We're back here, aren't we?" "We went through 5 whorehouse," Dragon deadpanned, her voice now firm and controlled. 5. "Don't call my geisha-chan whores. It's offensive and rude." Jiraiya replied with a mock-offended tone. The Toad Sun-In then gazed at Naruko and widened his arms, "If it isn't my goddaughter. Naru-chan, have you come to meet good old me?" Naruko cracked her knuckles. "OHI, you've got anything to say in your defense, mister?" Jiraiya raised an eyebrow. "What? But you aren't against me whoring. Don't tell me you became a prude while I wasn't looking." "I'm not talking with you, honorable pervert master," she gazed at Shinku. "I'm talking with him." Shinku pointed a finger at himself. "Yes, you," Naruko cracked her neck. 3 years without a letter. I said you had to write one every day." Shinku blinked behind his mask. It was an instant, and he connected the dots. Probably, the Hokage had looked through the file of the Umbu team assigned to the mission he had been on, and then he had seen his real name and told Naruko. "Until this mask is delivered back in the Hokage's hands, I cannot confirm nor deny who I am." Naruko growled, before smiling warmly. She disappeared from sight. Down. The punch soared through the air above him, but the wind pressure was enough to crack his mask. "Oh? Someone's gotten fast," Naruko smirked, before trying to bring her hand back down on Shinku's head. He substituted with a log, letting the wooden implement crash and break into splinters as he pushed himself behind Jiraiya's body. "There is a protocol for this," Shinku said. "And I fear for my safety if I do comply." "Oh, don't worry, Shin-chan," Naruko inclined her head to the side, her smile feral as she cracked her knuckles. "I'm just going to have a normal and friendly chat with you. May I first head to the Hokage's tower to deliver my mask?" "Aha! So you're not refuting being Shin-chan?" "The Hokage told you, probably," Shinku deadpanned back. Naruko cheekily grinned. "Well, why didn't you answer back? Where are my answers? I wrote you a letter each day, and I haven't gotten an answer back to any of them." "I wrote you back," Shinku retorted. "You stopped answering." "What? No way." Naruko spluttered, "I wrote one just a week ago. I even put extra stamps on it." "Dope," Sasuke sighed. "How about you let Shinku deliver his mask, and then I check with the Mangekyou if he's lying or not. That way we're both in the clear, and if he's saying the truth, then someone else is to blame." "What?" Naruko looked lost for a moment. "You mean my ball-stomping technique to make Shin-chan repent is useless?" Shinku tightened his hold on the back of Jiraiya. Now, Jiraiya brought his hands up. "What did I tell you about a man's most precious treasure, Naru-chan? It must be treated with kindness and concern," Naruko replied brightly, "but it's also the first thing to chop off if he makes you sad." "Sorry kid," Jiraiya mumbled. "I'm out." He puffed away in smoke. Shinku gripped the smoke for a moment, before resigning himself to face the full-out brunt of the onslaught. The blurry form of Naruko tackled him, her weight slamming him down on the ground hard as his breathing came less. "Shin-chan!" Naruko cried out, wailing like an overly emotional teenager. If it weren't for the 2 lumps of soft flesh that pressed against his chest, he'd think it no differently than having a toddler crying near him. "I missed you." "Stop making a fuss in public," Sasuke grumbled, before walking closer and offering a hand up. "I hope you're telling the truth, Shinku, because if I find out you're lying about the letters, do you know she nearly killed a courier ninja when they said they couldn't get a hold of you?" "Really?" Sasuke rolled his eyes. "OHI," Naruko whined, standing back up and wiping away her tears. "You were the one who set him on fire. He wanted me to file a complaint form, and I know how it works with complaint forms in offices. They're shredded during the night and then burned." Dragon just fidgeted from her spot, completely forgotten. "Well, let's go." Naruko gripped hard on Shinku's wrist. After we deal with this, we find who the bastard is that stole Shinchan's letters, and then we kick his ass all the way to hell and beyond. I did need someone to try Tsukuyomi on, Sasuke grumbled. 72 hours of eternal death, I wonder who would remain sane after that. The Uchiha gripped on his other wrist. Are you too scared I'll try to make a run for it? Shinku asked in disbelief, only to receive a pair of raised eyebrows back in response. Not scared, Naruko pouted, worried, maybe. I'm just making sure you stick with us all the way. You're a fundamental requirement to keeping Naruko quiet, and thus holding me sane, Sasuke said. I've heard enough complicated theories on what happened to you during the wartime that I think if you ever disappeared from sight tomorrow, Naruko might just believe there are evil shinobi from the land of Ramen set out to kidnap you. The land of Ramen. Shinku blinked. Naruko, did you grow up a bit in these years? Of course. Naruko pouted, before letting go and grabbing her breasts with both hands. See? Didn't I grow? Sasuke proceeded to slam a fist on Naruko's head, letting go. Shinku sighed. He wondered if it was some sort of technique. He was back by just a few minutes, and already he felt at home. He was glad for the mask because otherwise, for the first time in 3 years, someone would have seen him cry. He proceeded to walk past them, gesturing at Dragon to follow him. And really, the first thing you do is tell him about the ramen ninjas? That was just a joke when I was young. Dub, you told me that story 2 weeks ago. We're leaving you behind. Shinku exclaimed, waving a hand to the 2 bickering teammates of his. They actually did break the sound barrier, reaching for his side. OHI, Naruko said as they walked. Who's the chibi? She gazed at Dragon. Dragon, Shinku replied, the rookie. Hello Namikaze-sama, Dragon stuttered out. You haven't forgotten about Fu-chan, have you? Naruko asked warily. Shinku shook his head, before showing his right hand. I'm sure with the war over, I'll get the chance to write to her again. On the back of his hand, the flesh-eating bug remained with its bright red-colored carapace. Good. Naruko smiled. The 2 teammates of his actually had to wait outside as he and Dragon stepped inside the Hokage's office to remove their masks. It was mainly a formality, but one that had to be followed. Minato made an awkward smile. She didn't hit you hard, did she? Shinku shook his head. I dodged the first blow. Good, I was reviewing your missions in Umbu and theirs. Well, you have a really long overdue appointment with Inoichi of all things and a few medals to receive for the battle at Paddy Field's swamp. Minato's words trailed off as Shinku calmly removed his mask. His piercing crimson eyes gazed hard at the Hokage with a look of steel and fire, as his face riddled with small scars and nicks looked every bit like one of those that belonged to an old soldier, rather than a fresh rookie. It was a slaughter, not a battle, Shinku said quietly. He turned to gaze at Dragon, raising an eyebrow in wait. The girl trembled for a split second, before carefully gripping at the sides of her mask and pulling it away. The milky white eyes told him it was a Hyuga. The pale dark hair and the lineaments were familiar, but he hadn't seen the girl before. Dragon was 3 years his junior, and her skin was still soft. She hadn't been assigned for more than a month. Anyway, you received a promotion on the field after that slaughter, therefore I reinstate you, Hara no Shinku, back in the ranks of Konoha's active shinobi as a Jounin, while, here he turned to Dragon, I reinstate you, Hanabi Hyuga, as a Takubutsu Jounin for service rendered. The girl seemed displeased for a brief moment, before nodding awkwardly. Hi, Hokage-sama. You're both dismissed, and with those words, they both stepped outside. He looked towards Sasuke, who was already standing there with the Sharingan at the ready, and said crisply. I did not receive any reply from Naruko after 2 years, and since I stopped receiving letters, I stopped sending them after a while. Sasuke's Sharingan disappeared. He's telling the truth, or he's become a prodigious liar in the meantime. Good, Naruko grumbled. Why are you still here, Chibi? Naruko growled, then towards Hanabi, who appeared shocked to be on the receiving end of such a growl and a wave of fist. Enough, Shinku's left arm went up in front of Hanabi, and to that actually. Well, Sasuke's eyes widened in surprise as Naruko's mouth hung open. What? Shinchan. You feeling sick or something? Why you just... I'm famished for something warm, Shinku said plainly, and eating without the trouble of the mask is going to be a delight. Is that yakiniku near the grocery shop still open? He received a nod from Suzuki. Let's go, he gazed at Hanabi. Wolf did say she'd offer us a meat dinner if we all survived. I'll just offer the first round. Jiga. Naruko's hands went to her hair. An exorcist. Shin-chan's possessed. Suzuki sighed. People change, dope. But. Naruko slumped down her shoulders in defeat. All right, she grumbled. Let's go eat. They began to walk. By the way, what's the deal with the battle at Paddy Fields? Shinku's lips tightened lightly. That's not something I want to talk about. Silence fell as they walked. Suzuki mentally jolted down the name, as did Naruko. They gave a quick nod to one another, and then acted like normal. They'd check on it afterwards. Naruko was sure, the ramen ninjas had to be involved somehow. Chapter 53, Minding One's Own Mind. He had more than a few S ranks under his belt, thankfully. He should have remembered Naruko's appetite to be legendary. The way the meat seemed to disappear as it dropped in front of the girl was astonishing. A few pieces, he was sure Naruko ate raw. Eat up, rookie, he said towards Hanabi, who looked from him to the food and then towards his teammates who were scarfing down food without any ounce of modesty. Show. Naruko exclaimed, her mouth full, what's that about fatty piles? It's nothing I like to talk about, Shinku replied quietly, taking a sip of plum sake and grumbling through it. Don't even know why I'm trying this. OHI, alcohol's bad for you Shin-chan. Naruko exclaimed. Have to die of something eventually, he replied. And I did promise, he mumbled softly. And when the war is over, you'll get properly smashed and enjoy the wonders of alcoholic-induced hallucinations. If you say so, bear. He began to eat and munch on the meat in silence, his eyes scanning the waiters and the other customers. They were all looking in their direction, not surprising. So Chibi, Naruko said, how do you know Shin-chan? Ah, Hanabi said, I was assigned to Team Wolf a month ago. He was my primary caretaker. Naruko snorted. Kids these days, in my times, you don't become a jounin until you were at least 18. Shinku inclined his head to the side. I became jounin at 15. Naruko sputtered out the water she had been sipping. What? No way. How? The same way Kakashi became one at 13, he retorted. Oh, right, Kakashi nii, Naruko said softly. Shinku raised an eyebrow. Naruko bit her lips. Shinku waited. He's freeloading as always. He said he wouldn't get a team until all of his adorable soldiers were back. Shinku's right eyebrow twitched. So he survived the Kusanaga's poison. Of course he did. Bah-chan took care of it. Naruko smiled brightly, she was really a flash at that, only a few weeks of therapy and he was back on his feet. Suzuki gazed at Hanabi. How old are you? Ah, 15, Uchiha-sama, the girl replied quietly. You went into Umbu so young. Hanabi nodded. It was, I finished the academy early and became Chiryunin at 11, so. What's up with the new generation? Naruko whined, all passing us by. Sniffle, I feel so old Yuki-chan, what if my breasts start to sag? OHI Shin-chan, if they start sagging, you'll massage them right. Shinku smiled. Of course. Naruko shrieked, jumping from her spot to the upper corner of the chair like a scared cat, hissing in fright. Yuki-chan. Help. They corrupted Shin-chan. You can't. You have to splutter and stutter. Shinku chuckled. That's long in the past, he whispered. You show a bit of breast here, a bit there, there isn't a man who doesn't look. See. Gah. Get them off my face, cat. That's 2 strikes, Suzuki said quietly. At the third one, I'm pulling my teammate card and forcing you to answer. Shinku gazed with a small twitching smile towards Suzuki, before nodding. Naruko returned to her seat, cradling her breasts in fright. Hanabi actually gazed down at hers for a moment, before looking back up with a light blush on her cheeks as she heard Shinku make a small heh sound that sounded terribly like a snicker. I wasn't. It's all right, Chibi, Naruko said with a knowing nod, they'll grow. A bottle of sake found its way on the table, a very big bottle of sake. Shinku gazed at the waiter, who made a small nervous smile. A gift from the honorable sirs of that table, and with that, the waiter gazed at a table where 4 shinobi with the Jounin jacket stood. They gave him a nod of recognition, and Shinku inclined his head to the side before returning it with a politely mouthed thanks. So, what did you do while in Umbu, Shin-chan? Naruko asked, curiously moving her head from the 4 Jounin back to the bottle. Especially to get such a big bottle. I just did my job, he muttered. I was in a rescue team that went behind the enemy lines. Our job was to save the infiltration guys who got captured or check if the safe house were breached. My team probably did save those guys, or maybe we didn't and they think I'm one of those who did, doesn't really matter. I was just doing my job. And Chibi helped out too? Naruko asked. No, the rescue team was the first team I was in, Shinku said. I spent 2 years with them, being the rookie. Then, I moved to a supply team, before entering an assassination team and finally ending up in Wolf's cleaning team. Naruko was about to say something, but Sasuke interrupted. That was strike 3. Shinku just smiled. Oh? Really? He chuckled. That's not going to change anything. You know I can just check with Dad, Naruko said, won't take much to find out what happened. Ah, abusing your father's power now, Naru-chan. Shinku said with a small smile, shaking his head, isn't that the coward's way to go? Silence fell for a moment at the table. Shin-chan. No, Shinku smiled brightly. It's been a while. How have you lot been doing? Oh, Naruko blinked. Murder happy, Shin-chan. You're still in there. Inner snorted. Of course I'm in here, I'm always in here. Hanabi gazed perplexedly at the scene. She didn't understand what was going on, but she resolved to simply watch. Well, why don't you tell us what happened? Naruko pouted. I'm not headbutting you here, but we can take it outside if you want. Like I give a damn, Inner snorted. Want to know what happened? Fine, enjoy the tale. I wonder if you feel happy at night knowing you're a busybody always barging in other people's life. Shin-chan isn't. It's the same principle, Inner retorted. If I don't want to talk about it, I don't talk about it. Your bullheadedness is going to be your downfall one day, and you'll probably die old and with saga breasts surrounded by cats and empty ramen cups. Naruko winced, before clenching her fists. You started rotting while you were alone, murder happy Shin-chan. You want to call me something, call me Shinku or don't call me at all, Inner snarled. Who do you think was there to pick up the pieces after the letters stopped, You think seeing a team you've been together for 2 years through thick and thin be slaughtered right in front of you is worthy of a tale at dinner? His eyes shone with anger as he clasped his hands together and placed his elbows on the table. Well, fine. 2 years, I spent 2 years with the Umbu team and receiving letters from you. I answered back with what I could without infringing rules, and that was that. Then the Battle of Paddy Fields came around and I had to pick the pieces. I had to be the one to be there for him, because there was no one else. Shinku gripped the sake bottle and drank half of it in one go, before putting it back on the table. It was a slaughter. We were set up because of false information and we ended up ambushed. It was meant to be a supply line. We were meant to rescue a few prisoners. It was an armed group of 25 shinobi from Sound. He ground his teeth. We shouldn't have engaged, but they were aiming for the makeshift hospital camp nearby. We had to warn the forward camp, so we had to hold them off. We sent a runner, but she was ambushed and killed by 5 more, his hands clenched furiously. In the end, we were 3 against 30. There weren't any trees, only the marsh and the rice fields. The first to die was Bear. He took down 6 shinobi before kicking the bucket. Cat died next, she took out 4. And I took down 20, he chuckled grimly. Turns out, an overdose of soldier pills works wonders when you don't care about your life. He exhaled, letting his back fall against the chair. They gave me a shiny parchment saying I was a nice good Umbu for doing the right thing and a field promotion to Jounin. Then they placed me in another team, and then another, and then one more. Shinku gazed at the food on the table. Now, are you satisfied? Nariko didn't say a word. Suzuki couldn't say anything either. He knew Nariko wasn't the height of grace and generally attacked every problem in front of her with brute force to solve them, but he couldn't fault Shinku for having snapped at her. He couldn't fault Nariko for being worried, but... Nariko bit her lips, trying to come up with words, but they all slipped out of her mind as she kept on looking at the gaze of utter disgust Shin-chan had on his face. I should, probably go, Hanabi muttered. I'll leave too, Shinku acquiesced, standing up. He slammed the money on the table, more than enough to cover the food expenses, and then he stepped outside, walking briskly towards his apartment. He nearly missed a step as he mumbled out. Did you have to be that harsh? She was asking for it, Inner hissed. And we both know she would have insisted and begged and sniffled, and frankly, this way she knows, and maybe she'll learn a lesson with it. But we've been fine for years now, Shinku, he hissed. We don't need them. We don't need anyone. We are more than enough as we are. You, me, and this thing here. There was a low growl from the shackled individual, we're enough. But she wasn't responsible for the letters, someone else. Does it matter? In the end, she chose not to pursue it. Stick to yourself, it works. His hurried footsteps carried him all the way towards his door, which he opened without wasting time. The room wasn't dusty. It had an old, "Welcome back Shin-chan" sign and balloons hanging from the ceiling. There was a cake set up, and a chibi smiling image of Nariko on a small note that read, I set this up with Kage Bunshin. Surprised. He slammed his right hand against the wall, watching as it cracked. He was angry at things and at himself, and at everyone and no one in particular. He ground his teeth as he nearly roared, gripping the sides of his head with his eyes wide. He breathed deeply, falling down on his knees before closing his eyes shut. It's all right. Inner's back was against his, as they both sat in the blood-soaked desert, gazing at the dark bleeding moon that hung up in the sky of his mind. I'll always have your back. It hurts. Let it go, Inner whispered. Let it go. I'll take it. Hand it over. Give me your pain, my shoulders are strong enough. They had no right to ask. They had no right to ask, Inner replied. They had no right to demand. They had no right to barge in and ask for answers they weren't meant to hear. How many did we kill? Don't ask for a number, I lost count, Inner murmured. Inoichi is going to have a field day tomorrow. We can always skip. Yeah, Inner rolled his eyes. That is so going to work. The cake was in the trash can by the time he woke up the next morning, and the decorations shredded and thrown away. He grumbled as he stepped outside. He hadn't received any summons from the Hokage, so he was still in the clear. He'd do the groceries. The fridge was somewhat lacking in everything but ramen. The sun's glow seemed very bright for his mood that morning. He began to walk, ignoring the gossip that seemed to circle around his appearance. He was wearing his usual reinforced jacket with umbu uniform beneath it and his hair cut short with the back cropped in a small spiky ponytail. Maybe it was his face, or his murder-inclined eyes. He entered a supermarket, grabbed a basket and was off. Everything was perfectly fine. If he kept repeating that in the back of his skull, then it would become true. The cashier calmly counted the total and gave him a price, which he paid with ease. He had money, why not splurge? He stepped outside holding a frozen cone in his right hand and the shopping bag in his left. A glint of silver caught his attention. Yo! Kakashi waved at him from the other side of the street and Shinku snorted. You're late, he acquiesced. I was expecting you at my door. The second cone sailed the air as the Jounin grabbed it with a bored look. Really? Ma, I feel honored you remember me after so long, my little genin. You should stick to the little umbu or the little soldier, Shinku retorted. So, you're here because the Hokage reformed the old team, aren't you? Kakashi's only eye smiled. Indeed, somehow, he managed to lick the cone even with his mask on. They began to walk along the street. Shouldn't Jounin go their respective way? Yep, Kakashi replied, but your teammates aren't Jounin. Shinku gazed ahead for a moment. His gaze then returned to Kakashi. Come again. They aren't Jounin. But they had the flak jacket and the Chiryunin flak jacket, sure. Unfortunately, Suzuki is bound by hospital work and Nariko's mentality isn't mature enough for Jounin. Power-wise sure, they'd be top Jounin, but this and that kept them from achieving the rank. I swear, if you're preparing some type of backhanded deal. No, Kakashi chuckled with his carefree tone. It is nothing like that. They walked in silence for a bit more, neither of the two really having a direction in mind. Even delivering the groceries back home wasn't important now. I heard about paddy fields. Somehow, I didn't expect you to survive that. Kakashi gazed at him. What? I'm made of tough stuff. I meant the aftermath, Kakashi replied. Are both of you all right? Shinku smiled. Yes, he gazed at the sky. We are. Good, Kakashi hummed. So, you snapped at Nariko. She told you. She returned in quite the sorry state, Kakashi pointed out. No matter how many years she has, she'll always be a child at heart. She'll get over it. She's 18, isn't she? You're still kids in my eyes, Kakashi said. They apparently headed towards the Yamanaka flower shop. You have a girlfriend, or are you going to force me into the office of that prick? Now, that isn't the way to go about. Kakashi casually took out his Ika Ika. I have the newest edition of Ika Ika, and I might be willing to share. If I liked porn, I might be willing to accept. Since I don't like porn, but I have the groceries in my hands and can't properly run away, how about you bring the groceries back to my apartment and I graciously head inside? Shinku smiled. Kakashi gave him a sour look. You dash the opposite direction. Ah, that won't work then. Shinku inclined his head to the side. Fine, he shrugged. I'll have to buy the groceries again. You don't want to make this difficult, Kakashi said. Don't overestimate your abilities. Come at me with the intent to kill, Kakashi-sensei, Shinku replied. Point is, isn't it difficult to defend yourself without killing, when someone else doesn't care about that? Kakashi closed his only eye and sighed. Very well, he shrugged and began to walk down the road, with Shinku following behind him. You've grown up to be quite the handful. I had the best teacher I could possibly ask for, Shinku answered, gazing ahead. I taught you too well. There's always something new to learn from the old glories of the past, Kakashi-sensei. Kakashi chuckled. I'm not that old. What? Just because your hair is silver doesn't mean you can hide the gray hair. The silver-haired Jounin gave him a sour look. I don't have gray hair. Sure. How about a spar? The training grounds seemed to be their new direction. I win, you head over to Inoichi. You win, you get to avoid the visit today. Going against the legendary copycat ninja Kakashi Hatake. Speak of a fun way to lose. You can't have everything in life, and I'm doing this out of concern for the groceries. You're just itching for a fight against someone you might be able to defeat in your old age. I forgot your intuitive skills, Kakashi grumbled. And I am not old. Sure, want a cane to walk on. Is this how our talks are going to be from now on? Shinku didn't reply, but gently placed the grocery bag near the tree of the training ground. He cracked his neck, before turning to face Kakashi. Want to start up slow? Show me what you've got, kid, Kakashi said cheerfully. Maybe I'll actually get serious. Shinku charged, his right fist coming for the side of Kakashi's head. The Jounin blocked the blow with his left arm, only for Shinku to smile as he pulled the hand back in his sleeve to pour chakra in a seal. Barbed wire coiled out of it, forcing Kakashi to make a light jump backwards. The wire retracted back with another dose of chakra, and Shinku twirled a kunao in his left hand. Well, sensei, I know it's not fair to gang up on an elderly person, he chuckled, but this? I've been waiting for this day for years. Kakashi hummed. You make another old man joke and I'll gut you, brat. Shinku's smile turned feral. I'd like to see you try. A dust cloud lifted behind Shinku as he glided forward. The moment before slamming into Kakashi, he twisted his body and spun in midair, throwing a right kick to Kakashi's guard. The silver-haired Jounin huffed as he blocked the blow. You've polished your taijutsu at least. An explosive tag slid out of Shinku's left hand as he finished the rotation, before pushing it against Kakashi's block. The Jounin sidestepped, gripping onto Shinku's wrist. The moment he did that, Shinku's other arm moved to aim at Kakashi. Quickly letting go, Kakashi ducked as a volley of shuriken left Shinku's sleeve. That is annoying. Throwing a kick on the ground, Shinku lifted a cloud of dust in Kakashi's direction. The moment barbed wire emerged from the cloud, surrounding and holding tight Kakashi's body, Shinku sighed. The body turned into a wooden trunk riddled with explosive tags, which detonated a moment after. Shinku barely managed a substitution of his own as Kakashi slammed a kunai in his neck. He hadn't substituted with a wooden log, however. He had used an oil flask. You know, I did manage to get myself a nickname during the war, Iner remarked offhandedly as he watched Kakashi deftly avoid the puddle of oil. And the requirement for Jounin rank is to master 2 chakra techniques of different nature. The oil turned into a vapor cloud with a hand seal. Hope you don't mind charred flesh? Kakashi smiled, having already pinpointed Shinku's location in the clearing. Now, I was just wondering where I could have a nice barbecue. Shinku jumped down from his branch just as another Kakashi tried to punch him in the back. The oil cloud exploded, making the cage bunshin disappear. Now that's not nice, hitting someone in the back, Shinku deadpanned, bringing his left arm up to block a fist for his face. Kakashi hummed, I feel a bit underestimated. Well, you're old and cranky. I don't want to make you feel impotent, you know. I wonder where your other self is while you fight, Kakashi retorted, sending a kick his way only for Iner to deflect it. Both Jounin palmed a kunai at the same time, slicing at each other as the sparks flew. I think he's in there, directing your movements. One of us was always good in theory. He just lacked the will to execute it, Iner smiled. Together, we're not as weak as you might think. The left hand went through hand seals, the right one sliced away. Ambidextrous. No, let's just say each of us has a favorite hand. Shinku's throat enlarged, before a stream of fire erupted from his mouth. Kakashi jumped backwards. You want to bring techniques into this? If it's too much for an elderly, we can always go and eat some pudding at the hospital. I'm sure they'll change your diapers there. Kakashi's hand went to his forehead protector. I told you to stop with the old jokes. The moment the Sharingan came into full view, Shinku hummed. Why? You're not getting any younger, oldie. Kakashi charged with a rakery. Shinku hastily dodged and slammed a kick in the air behind him. The real Kakashi grumbled, his genjutsu dispelling. No can do. Once you know the trick, it's easy to avoid it. When in doubt, Kai. To think you were afraid of sparring, Kakashi muttered, what gives? Well, I don't actually care if I hurt you or not. I know I should be considerate to my elders, but you really are someone I want to slam in the ground. Is that a shared sentiment? Kakashi asked. Well, 2 of us want you to suffer a bit. Shinku's smile turned feral. The third one just wants to slaughter you. In the moment Kakashi's brain connected the dots, Shinku pounced on the split second he had of distraction. His chakra burned a dark purple as a chakra hand shot out from his arm. The silver-haired Jounin blocked the strike of Shinku's normal punches, but the fire chakra hand gripped at the man's wrist, making him pop in a cloud of smoke. A cage bunshin? Really? Shinku exhaled with sweat trickling down his forehead. And after I opened up my heart to you? Sensei, you really are an old acidic crone. The humming of the rakery reached his ears. You know, I never understood one thing, Shinku said. How the hell can you consider the rakery an assassination technique, when it makes so much frigging noise? The Sharingan is a key part to it. With that, Kakashi slammed his rakery straight through Shinku's guts, the Jounin appearing out of thin air in front of him. Yeah, Shinku smiled back. I know that. The henge dropped, revealing a barrel. A barrel of gunpowder. Kakashi growled as he made a split-second decision of using the Kamui, to absorb the explosion into the parallel dimension it was that or losing his hand. Flexing his fingers, the silver-haired Jounin said with his usual carefree voice. You want me to lose my fingers? I stocked up just for you. You know, Naruko was right. Storage seals are awesome. Don't you feel light-hearted and refreshed now? Kakashi retorted, slowly bringing his forehead protector back down to cover his sherry non. Think you can handle Inoichi? I think I can murder him, Shinka replied. And I still haven't landed a punch on your face. That's never going to happen, Kakashi deadpanned. So, you're coming down from that tree anytime soon? Shinka clicked his tongue. To think there were people saying I was good at hiding. I'm old, give me some credit on the experience, Kakashi brightly said. Shouldn't you be taking your afternoon nap then? Shinku inclined his head to the side, before slowly walking forward with his right hand in the gesture for the end of training symbol. Kakashi inwardly chuckled at that hand sign, before bringing his right hand to meet with it. The moment the two met, Shinku sucker punched Kakashi in the guts with his left hand. Kakashi wheezed. He had expected the blow, and he had let it come. It does feel refreshing, Shinku acquiesced. Fine, he huffed. I'll go and see Inoichi, sensei. See you tomorrow morning at the Hokage Tower, 7 sharp, Kakashi replied. We'll be going on a rank. A rank? Wait. You were testing me too, weren't you? Shinka grumbled. I held back, Kakashi nodded sagely. But so did you. I didn't want to go to jail for killing an old man, although in your case it probably might have been legitimate self-defense. You know, I think a few people might have even agreed with me. Kakashi ruffled Shinku's hair, a smile on his face. You grew up well, brat. I had a good teacher. Oh? Should I feel flattered? I'm talking about life, old man. Now you're going to make me cry, wiping away a mock tear. Kakashi watched Shinka head over to grab his grocery bag. Together, the two began to walk towards Inoichi's flower shop. I'm sure he'll make a call on me being late as some sort of resemblance to a teacher-father figure, Shinka grumbled. Kakashi's face was back behind his porn book. Shinka bit his lips as he walked in silence for a while. I cannot guarantee his safety if he comes inside my head. Kakashi moved his only eye to gaze at Shinka's frowning face for a moment, before returning to the paragraph about Tsunade-chan and Zanzan. He's an expert, he'll be fine. Oh, yeah, because having to have your mind rummaged through is always a fun thing. Kakashi stopped walking outside the flower shop. See you tomorrow, kid. I got it, old man. The inside of the shop hadn't changed much except the flowers, which were now different because of the different season. There was a young woman at the counter with a blonde and long ponytail, who gazed at him with her striking blue eyes. She had her arms crossed over the counter, her head against them and lazily flipping through a magazine. She did stop when she saw him enter. Hello, she brightly smiled at him, how may I help you? She stood up, moving around the counter and towards him. I should have an appointment with Inoichi-san, Shinku said, half an hour ago. Oh, the woman blinked. You're late. Obviously, Shinka retorted. The woman snickered lightly. My father isn't really that scary. I was busy sparring and lost track of time, he shrugged. I can always come another day. No, I'm sure he still hasn't another patient for a good half an hour, the woman remarked. She climbed the stairs while he waited down in the office. The scent of flowers was nice, and he began to hum as he closed his eyes. It was very different from the smell of blood. When the woman walked back down, she smiled awkwardly. He'll see you now, Harano-san. Both hands in his jacket, a smile on his lips that looked similar to a wolf, Inner began to walk the stairs upwards. See you soon, Yamanaka-san. Ino shuddered lightly as she watched Shinka walk past her. It had been just a moment, but she could swear there had been blood dripping down his shoulders. She shook her head a moment later and returned to her magazine. It was unfortunate, but the only guys that stepped into the shop were either already with a girlfriend or nutcases. She really had no luck when it came to love. Inner waved at Inoichi, closing the door behind him as he exhaled. So, per protocol I have to let you in my head now, You were waiting for this moment patiently, right? Inoichi's smile was tight. It's just to check you're not a plant or a spy, Harano-san. Man, I'm never going to get used to the san, Shinku sighed. Just call me Shinku. Is your other self listening in? Yes, he nodded. And why isn't he out? Is he still afraid of me? No, but he just wants to make sure I won't try any funny business while you're in our head. Inner sighed. And he's a better speaker than me. I have the tendency to tick off people. I appreciate the concern, Inoichi replied. There haven't been any changes in your status. Course not, Shinku smiled. We're both fine with our arrangements. Outer gives me the advice and I deliver a striking execution. Very well, Inner sat as Inoichi did the same. Bringing his hands up in the seal for the Yamanaka's trademark technique, Inoichi exhaled. He executed the technique. Inner's eyes closed. His smile grew. Calmly he stood and traced his hand across Inoichi's desk, slowly but surely reaching for a kunao. He stopped halfway through, returning to his seat. Now, if only he could do this also with genjutsu, he'd have to train more on it. The blood-soaked desert was the first thing Inoichi saw. Tall pillars of stone etched with kanji rose through the sand, like ruins of crumbled towers. Outer stood with his arms crossed and a nervous expression on his face. The moon was dark and red, dribbling down blood. Hello, Yamanaka-san. I admit, this is the first time I see a mind ordered in such a way. Inoichi gazed around. Usually, they're just random thoughts and images. His steps pressed on the sand. This actually seems pretty real. What can I say? Outer smiled. We had a lot of time to put it up. Inoichi frowned. I need to see your memories, but I can't seem to find them. Ah, yes. I remember that time your daughter tried that stunt, Outer replied. She made Inner so angry her sensei had to intervene, Shinku sighed. This way, his hands in his jacket, Outer began to walk towards a pillar with the kanji for war. He placed his feet on its surface, slowly walking upwards. Inoichi followed. I told her not to use such a technique during the tournament. I want you to understand that I take entering other people's memories seriously. I find no enjoyment in going through the private life of other shinobi. I'm not bothered. There's nothing pretty in this side of my mind, but it's all yours to see. The moment they reached the top of the pillar, a set of images and confused thoughts began to appear all around them. We have a rookie. Say hello to Birdie-chan. That's Cat, and let me tell you she's a whore before she does herself. Now, stop stuttering. There's nothing bad with speaking your mind up, kid. You lucky brat, receiving letters from home, My lady refused to even look at me when I left, she's always like that. So, you're not a fresh off the academy? Then again, you are young for well, if you're already wedded then come on along. What were you saying about not being good enough? You're a natural. Man, I wish I killed that neatly the first time I did the deed. OHI, you're still a virgin? Holding it in for your sweetheart, huh? The voice had changed to a female one. How cute. Watching you squirm is so fun. Nah, relationships are complicated. I just love teasing and taking care of my bothers. Want to have a try too, kid? Pop the cherry. So, it's been a year already, another female voice, and I thought, why not give the kid a gift? Here you go, brat. An image flashed by, showing a bundle of barbed wire. What, you expected something better? Really, kids these days? No, it's fine, this was Shinku's voice replying. Really, it's fine. OHI. Don't get the waterworks flowing. More chatter, images, they all flowed by as the years of war were examined by Inoichi carefully. So Crane's the fastest of us all, the voice was tense now. You go and warn camp. But Bird's the youngest. It doesn't matter, Shinku replied sternly. I'm a soldier of Konoha. You go and warn camp. We'll hold them off and regroup later. Fine, Crane replied. Let's get smashed at the end of this. Yeah, Bear said. First round's on me. I'll pay the second, Shinku's voice came through. Let me have the third one, Cat stated. Then, I'll buy the fourth, Crane whispered. It was the last time he saw her alive. Images of explosions flashed by, the rice fields overturned and mudded. Corpses floated in the shallow waters, feasted upon by fleas and mosquitoes. Ah! And they think they can pass us by? What pathetic! Kat's voice died out together with the blood that splattered all over her face. Her right hand blown off neatly, the next attack sliced her in two. The images flickered for a moment. Inoichi frowned. He tried to stop the flow, but it seemed to refuse him. "Can we skip the battle, please?" Outer whispered, his voice hoarse. "There's no need to see more, right?" Inoichi exhaled. "I am short on time," he smiled lightly. "I'll need to view the rest of your memories. Are you free next week, Monday at 8 in the morning?" "Thanks," Outer murmured, giving a nod. Inoichi stepped out of Shinku's mind first, and the moment he did, Outer snapped his fingers. The pillars shattered, returning to sand as hidden by one of them a body chained and shackled stood growling. "Ah!" Outer exhaled, "What a pathetic liar I am." The thing growled. Then again. He chuckled lightly, "You can't come out." He sat down next to the growling and trashing creature. Not yet," he whispered. Only when we're stronger. Only then. In the silence of the blood-soaked desert, only the light growls of the creature remained. Outer emerged the moment he stepped back down in the shop. His gaze went to Ino, who tried her best to ignore him. "Excuse me," he said, making Ino jolt lightly. "I'd like to buy some flowers." "Sure," Ino stumbled out of her chair. "Any particular reason?" Forgiveness." "White roses," Ino replied without a fault. She moved towards a particular rose bush. "How many would you like?" "2," Outer replied quietly. Ino snapped them with a pair of gardener's scissors with precise and fluid motions, before moving to the counter. "That will be 5 ryos. Can you wrap them separately?" Ino smiled back, "Sure." Shinku paid, before grabbing only one of the 2 wrapped roses and handing the other over to Ino. "Here." Ino's eyes widened in surprise. I. As a sorry for being scary, Shinku replied as Ino grabbed the rose. "I'll be back next week, so I don't want to keep on walking on eggshells." "Ah." A light blush spread over Ino's cheeks. "All right." With a wave, Shinku was out. Ino sighed. She sat down once more behind the counter, grumbling. She really had no luck in love at all. Why did a sweet one have to be a nutcase? Shaking her head, she smelled the rose and exhaled. She began to hum happily afterwards, flipping through the magazine's pages. It was going to be a nice day, she was sure of it. Chapter 54, Intuitive Realizations. Nariko gazed at the gym. She held a sort of half-empty look that seemed to go beyond what she was actually seeing. She took a deep breath, and then she began to walk out of there. She wasn't insensitive. Maybe she was a bit tactless, but she wasn't insensitive. It was just, problems were solved when you spoke about them. Bottling them up was no good. If you had a problem, you needed to vent it out in order to get rid of it. She took to Konoha's streets with a half-grimace. The people always looked at her and smiled, or cheerfully waved a hand at her if they were young kids who grew up with the stories of how much of a hero she was. The problem was, being a hero wasn't easy. The hero is always strong. The hero never shows weakness. The hero is always the one who shines through the darkest of days and stands back up, flaming sword in hand, and defeats the big bad evil with a single strike. Yet she couldn't help but feel useless. She had spent 5 years, 5 maddening years, going no further than a single day's walk from Konoha. She hadn't done anything awesome. Sure, she had mastered the raise non. Sure, she had mean-ass techniques and could do thousands of things at the same time. Sure, she was happy that the war never touched the village, but at the same time, she felt empty. She should have been on the front lines, not in Konoha. Her father had gone, leaving behind Narashikaku to oversee things in the village. She hadn't. She wasn't mature enough. What sort of stupid excuse was that to begin with? She wasn't mature enough? Yet her father had let Shinku go. Why him and not her? Why him and not Sasuke? The answer had actually been easy to find. She was important. Sasuke was important. Shinku just wasn't important enough. It didn't matter that there was virtually no way she could get hurt. It didn't matter that she and Sasuke could probably take on her father and win. In his eyes, she was probably still the immature child that screamed about wanting to be Hokage and that ate 20 cups of ramen in a single serving. It was harder and harder to keep up the friendly face when old people waved at her. It was difficult to just walk alongside the street rather than Shunshin wherever she wanted to go, but the people needed to see her happy. They needed to see her strong. She was a pillar for the village. She was their hero, their savior, their perfect most awesome kunoichi. Naruko would have liked to frown, at least once. She would have liked to be angry. She would have liked to go out with a group of people, talk, and laugh about nothing. Her friends were Sasuke and Shinku. She had no others. She was the center of everyone's attention, and yet at the same time they all kept her at an arm's length. Ichiraku's ramen was good, she spoke with Ayame and Toukijiji, but the nagging doubt that it was simply a customer-worker relation never left her mind. In the end, she was probably the most insecure person in all of Konoha. Still, she hadn't been wrong. She refused to believe she had been wrong. Her long strides took her to solve the problem. She slammed her hand repeatedly against the wooden door. "Ohi, Shinku." She could be an adult. She was an adult. Open up the damn door. She wasn't wrong, even as the door opened and Shinku gazed at her with his crimson eyes. She recognized those, and they weren't Shin-chan's. She crossed her arms over her chest. "The world doesn't revolve around you," she snapped, before planting a finger straight against his chest as she pushed her way inside while he backpedaled. "All right. You lost your Umbu team and felt like shit. I was too forceful and you snapped, all right. I get it. I do, but I want to talk with Shinku, I'll apologize to him." The other Shinku snorted, rolling his eyes. A few seconds later, and they softened up as his body stopped being tense. "I'm not a child," Naruko began softly. I haven't seen you in 5 years. 5 years are like a lot of time. You looked sad, but I didn't know it was something so bad. She rubbed her right hand against her left arm. "I thought it was something easy to fix. I really didn't. I didn't mean to pry something like that in that way. So, what I'm trying to say is that I'm sorry I forced you to tell me the story, but I wasn't wrong, because I'm your friend, right? And friends aren't happy when their friends are sad." "No," Shinku muttered, shaking his head. "I'm the one who has to apologize. Inner shouldn't have been that harsh." There was a moment of silence. Naruko fidgeted with a strand of hair. "We're still friends, right?" she asked in the end. "If you'll still have me." Naruko smiled. "So, did you totally write a letter to Fu or not?" Shinku nodded, producing one such letter. Within, he had placed a pressed white rose. Good, Naruko smiled. "So." She exhaled, I can't promise I won't try to find out what's wrong with you, Shin-chan. I know it might seem I'm doing this because I'm curious and tactless but I just worry. Sasuke always says I'm a worrywart," she snickered, "but well, if you have a problem, you can talk with us. I'll totally listen." Shinku nodded. "It will take some time to get used to it," he muttered. "It's been 5 years, Naruko smiled brightly, 3 considering we wrote to each other." "Right, then how about this?" She brought her pinky finger forward. "I did this with Yuki-chan too, by the way, a long time ago." She wiggled her pinky finger until Shinku brought up his. "I pinky swear I'll always be Shinku's friend, through thick and thin, and though we may quarrel we'll always have each other's back." Her voice came out soft as she finished the pinky swear. "I swear," she mumbled at the end. "I swear too," Shinku replied, a small smile on his lips. "Sheesh, this is embarrassing," Naruko said as she dropped the pinky swear form. "Really?" she huffed, bringing her chin upwards. Such a refined and mature woman having to do such embarrassing poses. Shinku chuckled. "I'm sorry about." "It's all right," Naruko shrugged. "I know I'm pretty childish, Shin-chan," she hummed, "but really, you made Jounin before us, I wonder what's the maturity thing about." "You want to know?" Shinku said warily. "I mean, they did tell me." Naruko's hands gripped his flak jacket the next instant. "What? What is it?" Do you have to, like, know 1,000 different mathematical formulas? Is it like having to always speak politely? It's the ability to consciously know when you must sacrifice yourself for the good of the mission, Shinka replied quietly. Naruko's hands let go of Shinka's jacket as if burned. What? The Jounin is a highly skilled shinobi operative, assigned to only the most difficult of missions. Before placing himself, he must place the village. Before placing his life, he must place the citizens' lives. Before placing his friends, his loved ones, and everything else, he must place the well-being of the entire village. That is what being a Jounin is about, to be able to commit the ultimate sacrifice for the good of the village. You mean? I don't know what I did in that battle, but I was ready to die for the mission, he acquiesced. That is the maturity required. To know that at any moment, you will not falter in front of death. Naruko's eyes quivered. Then, she proceeded to slap Shinka hard on the side of the face. You aren't allowed to die on my watch. She yelled, gripping his jacket with her right hand. You hear me, Shin-chan? I don't care about this maturity stuff or whatever. If that's what it takes to become a Jounin, then I can go without the jacket. I can totally become the Hokage while being a Chunin, and then I can make things different. Shinka winced at the pain from the side of his jaw. Nobody should die protecting those he loves, Naruko mumbled, so, she said harder, I want you to promise me. Promise me you won't die, no matter what. Promise me you won't do a stupid bullshitting thing like sacrificing yourself. Promise it to me, Shin-chan. Promise it now. I can't make promises, I can't keep, he exhaled. If it will be required. Then I'll become Hokage, Naruko growled, I'll become Hokage faster than my dad, and I'll take over, and I'll never, ever, give you a mission where you have to die. I might not be good with the paperwork, so you should count yourself hired as the secretary of the Hokage. What makes you think I can do paperwork? Shinka retorted. Please, Naruko rolled her eyes. Anyone can do paperwork. I just don't want to do it because of principles. How are you going to become Hokage, if you don't actually love the village? Shinku blurted out, his eyes widening. Naruko stopped breathing. She actually stopped breathing for a single moment. How? She croaked out. I. You don't trust anyone but your friends, Shinku continued. You love your family, but, what of the rest of the people in the village? But I don't hate. No, you don't, Shinku said, but you don't love the village. You barely tolerate the villagers. Maybe, that's why the Hokage hasn't made you a Jounin yet. Until you're able to. But why not promote Sasuke then? Naruko snapped then, alright, I get it, my dad probably knows I don't really love the village all that much, but, why not Sasuke? He's going to die, isn't it? As a Jounin, he'd be more valuable on the fields and outside the village. He wouldn't be able to do what he likes, and being a medic nin is what he does like, right? Naruko's shoulders trembled. How can you just say that and make me believe it's right? It's something your father would do, because Sasuke's your friend and you love him very much, and he's friends with his parents, and there's a lot more reasons why he wouldn't let Sasuke leave the hospital's staff. He's not going to die. We'll find a way to heal him, Orochimaru's dead, so we can find his research, stuff like that, and I saw the worst of it, Shinku acquiesced. Sasuke's lucky he's in Konoha. I saw men, women, children, their corpses horribly mutated and suffering like hell. Killing them was a mercy, he shook his head. Enough of this heavy talk. I'm just suggesting reasons, they don't have to be the real ones. No, I know my father, Naruko shook her head. That's something he would do. She looked at him, but then, why did he send you into Umbu? I wasn't strong enough, Shinku shrugged. Do or break, probably. Let's face it, I'm stronger than 5 years ago, but I'm never going to be able to do things as you or Sasuke do. No matter how many tricks I can come up with, if I had to face either you or Sasuke, I'd lose. I know that, I accepted that a long time ago, but the point is, he probably thought that I'd be safer out of Konoha than with you in Konoha. How many knew I was your teammate before the tournament? Nearly no one. We spent a lot of time outside of the village, our very training was done in the forest of death. His voice turned soft as he considered his next words. He sent us on long missions which were supposedly safe and easy to do, but at the same time far away. If I had to hazard a guess, it was because he didn't want it to be a known fact I was part of your team until it was the tournament time, and even then he kept us separated after that. You're talking as if my dad hates you, Shin-chan, Nariko replied. I don't think he does. No, but if we apply the same reasoning he opted for keeping you and Sasuke Chiryunin, which is doing your best interests, then he was probably trying to protect me. From what? Nariko inclined her head to the side. It's not like there would be any reason to target you. Oh help me, Nariko, I've been kidnapped by Orochimaru, Shinku deadpanned back. Nariko winced, before raising her hands up in defeat. All right, so it was the snake bastard. If it was, he'd have tried to keep us inside Konoha, and not let us go outside. Shinku's eyes closed. Which means, the enemy is within the walls. Danzo Shimura trudged alongside Sai in the depths of Root's training facility. His hands came both up to hold tightly onto his cane, as he gave a venomous glare to the operative. I told you to kill him before he returned. What part of it was difficult to understand? Sai lowered his head in shame. Danzo-sama, he was with Jiraiya of the Sunin. I had no chances. That was supposed to be your way inside the team, I would have proposed your name. Danzo grumbled. Very well, he gazed at his old and wrinkled hands. I suspected the Yondaime was on to us from the beginning. You are to avoid any more contact with the target. I will find another way to place you within the team. Do not delude my expectations. The Uchiha's main Jakui's must be mine. Danzo began to walk again. I am the only one fit to use its power for the good of Konoha. Healing people in the hospital, how pathetic can a shinobi become? He's nothing like Itachi. Danzo-sama, concerning the letters. They've run out of usefulness. Burn them and erase all traces that can lead back to Root. Sai nodded firmly and flickered away. He had orders to carry out. He would carry them out. Minato Namikaze flexed his fingers thoughtfully, as his gaze went to Sasuke who stood in wait on one side of his office. Near him, Hanabi Hyuga held a stern and controlled face, her back uptight and her shoulders squared. They're late, Minato mumbled. If Kakashi's tardiness is infectious. You called, sensei. Kakashi entered from the window with an eye smile. They're later than Kakashi, Minato muttered in disbelief. Kakashi giggled as he flicked through a page of Ika Ika. Gaahhhhhhh. Shinku's scream was easy to hear as Nariko barreled in from the window with enough speed to shatter the glass. Shinku rolled in midair, deadening the blow as he rolled on the ground and landed with his back against the opposite wall. Gah! He coughed out, taking a deep breath as he stood up wheezing. Were you trying to kill me? OHI! We were late. Nariko exclaimed, and this was the fastest way. Nariko took that moment to gaze around the room. What's the chibi doing here? Ahem, the Yondaime coughed. You were supposed to receive an A-rank mission, but this has changed since the last hour. The mission you will undergo is an S-rank mission of extreme importance and that must be carried out with scrupulous behavior. Oh? What's it going to be? Nariko asked, her ears twitching. We're setting foot out of the village? Finally? After all these years? Yes. Nariko fist pumped in the air. You will head to Sunagakure, Minato acquiesced. We have received unsettling news that the Kazekige's son, Gaara, has been kidnapped. Whoever did this is probably a high-ranked shinobi or group of such, the Yondaime's cerulean eyes shone. They even might be the Akatsuki, which is why, Nariko, I ask of you to be extremely serious. If that is the case, you are to immediately summon a toad and I and Jiraiya will come over as fast as possible. Thanks for the trust, Dad, Nariko snorted, crossing her arms over her chest. It's like I'm not even 18 years old. This is a serious matter, Minato said sternly. Your team will be the same as always since Kakashi is an excellent tracker, and you will be joined by Hanabi Hyuga, whose Byakugan will be a great help in locating threats from afar, which should give you plenty of time to do a summoning. Nariko grumbled under her breath, before nodding. Minato turned to gaze at Suzuki. I had to hear an earful from Tsunade already, so do me a favor and come back alive. Suzuki rolled his eyes. Of course, Hokage-sama. She gave me an earful too. You're all dismissed, Minato said. Prepare and depart as quickly as possible. With a nod, they were all out of the office. Minato sighed, he'd have to replace the glass of the windows once more. What should I bring? Hanabi asked, her voice reaching Shinku's ears and making the boy turn towards the Hyuga who was following him. Sunagakuer is a desert. As much water as you can carry, easy to move in clothes and something to cover your eyes and face from the sand. Goggles would be better. Hanabi nodded, and then flickered in the direction of her house. He hadn't even unpacked his stuff from the scrolls he carried, so if worse came to worse he could fling a frying pan in the head of an S-rank shinobi. He wondered how funny that would be. An S-rank shinobi defeated by a frying pan, his lips twitched upwards in a small smile. You've made peace with Shinku? Suzuki asked Nariko, the two jumping from rooftop to rooftop side by side. Yep, Nariko nodded. You don't have to push yourself, Yuki-chan. You can leave the heavy lifting to me. Come off it, Dobe, Suzuki snorted back. I'm not infirm yet. They jumped another rooftop in quiet contemplation. You know, I wonder what's wrong with me sometimes. Nariko mumbled. Everyone can make friends so easily, and yet, I can't do that. You're just overly paranoid, Suzuki replied. Still, why don't you try with Chibi? If she's been on Shinku's team for a month, he'd probably say something if she were not to be trusted. Nariko brightened up. That's it. I just need you to tell me who's trustworthy and who isn't. Suzuki nearly missed the next roof. Are you serious? Yes. You can totally detect who's lying and who isn't, so if I have you tell me who I can trust and who I can't, I can make more friends and then Dad will see I'm not an antisocial brat and he'll hand over the hat. How did making friends suddenly turn into becoming Hokage? Suzuki asked, his voice wary. It completely seemed a Nariko-approved plan, which never ended well, unless they were pranking plans. Duh, Nariko rolled her eyes. It's because I'm awesome like that. Suzuki didn't say another word. He'd ask Shinku later, because it was true, he could see if people lied or not pretty well. Sherry non-activated or not, and in that instant, the moment Nariko had avoided telling the truth, he knew she was hiding something. A light bitterness crept into the back of his throat, as if bile had risen from his stomach. He pressed it down. It wasn't like that. There wasn't a particular reason he had been kept out of the loop of Nariko's thinking. The girl did that a lot when planning pranks. There really was nothing wrong. Chapter 55, Glazing the Wheels of Teamwork. The leafy forests of Land of Fire left the place to the heated sands of the Land of Wind gradually. First, trees began to grow shorter and dried out, the dirt turned to rocky gravel and the air became less humid. Then the sand appeared and with it the clear blue sky, from which a dazzling bright sun shone down its rays. Use the same concept applied when raining to keep your body temperature constant, Shinku said, turning his head towards Hanabi who was running slightly behind him. The Hyuga nodded firmly, hanging from each of his words. It was the common practice in Umbu for rookies, and although they weren't in Umbu any longer the fact remained. Mostly, experienced shinobi taught the inexperienced ones. It wasn't just a matter of teaching techniques, but simple tricks and things like how to maintain a constant body heat, how to make less noise when walking and so on. The concept of the rookie and the caretaker was plainly that of a teacher-student relationship. Kakashi watched the scene with amusement from his spot. There was a small rift in the team with him taking point. On one side he had Shinku and Hanabi, and on the other Nariko and Suzuki. It was obvious that Hanabi would stick closer to Shinku, and probably it had been instinctive for Nariko to stay clear of the new member. Still, the silver-haired Jounin supposed that after camping for the night things would either mend or get worse. If they worsened, he'd take action. Don't try to use chakra to stick to the sand, Shinku's voice came again to Kakashi's ears. When the terrain is uneven, it's best to walk lightly in small jumps and use a tiny trickle to glide the rest of the way. Hi, Hanabi replied awkwardly. Throwing a shinobi into war and into Umbu wasn't something easy on the mind, and assigning to them someone specific to latch on was the perfect solution to the problem. Kakashi hummed thoughtfully. He wondered if perhaps Shinku could have been a good Chiryunin sensei, if only he had been in another team, and then shook his head lightly. He was part of his team, and thus he could be nothing less than what he expected him to become, someone like him. Don't drink too much in one go, small sips over the course of small intervals is better. OHI, Naruko suddenly said. Can't you stop mothering her? She's old enough to know what to do, right? No. The reply hadn't come from Shinku. It had come from Hanabi. I am not knowledgeable with many of the tricks of the trade Shinku-san knows. I am grateful he takes the time to teach me what he knows. The reply was overly polite and with a subdued tone, which made Naruko gaze perplexedly at the Hyuga. Wait, you mean you're a fangirl? Shin-chan has a fangirl? Naruko shook her head in disbelief. You won't steal his underwear, right? Hanabi spluttered out in embarrassment. I would never. Yeah, I'm sure you can use your Byakugan to look under the clothes of people. That is an improper and shameful use of the Jujutsu of the Hyuga clan. No proper Hyuga would ever use it. Conserve your breath, Shinku said abruptly. Knowing sensei, he'll make us camp directly in Suna, which means traversing the desert with the sun at its peak. Kakashi chuckled. I'm not that bad. No, but you are old and senile and, unless you die of a stroke, you will make us trek through the entire desert. You know, the old jokes were funny only once, never. Are you sure you aren't simply forgetting because of Alzheimer? Kakashi grumbled under his breath. I'm fine. I still remember that scared little genin trembling like a leaf of 5 years ago, pity he turned out to be a smartass. Shinku didn't reply, exhaling lightly. So, Chibi, Naruko said after a few minutes of travel. Tell me, what did you and Shin-chan do while in Umbu? That is classified information, Namikaze-san, Hanabi said. Did you do some dirty things in the bushes? Naruko's perverted leer was an all too familiar sight for Shinku's eyes, but Hanabi turned a bright scarlet. And no. It's improper of all things. That sort of thing. Leave her alone, Naruko. Not everyone thinks only of ramen and perversions like you, Suzuki said, his voice coming out for the first time since the start of the trip. But Yuki-chan, I have to make sure Shin-chan and Fu-chan become a couple, and then when they'll have a child I'll be the godmother and you can be the godfather, and afterwards I'll teach Shin-chan's kid how to be awesome and... Don't worry, Shinku muttered to Hanabi, who was still red-faced. She's like that. She seems completely different from what people say, Hanabi said after a short while. Shinku remained quiet. Naruko's ranting in the air died out once more. The silence lasted for a good 5 minutes. How big is this desert anyway? Quite big, Kakashi answered. How long will it take? Quite a lot, Kakashi replied, a light carefree tone in his voice. A few minutes passed by, before Naruko asked a dreaded question. Are we there yet? 2 hours later and Kakashi decided to set camp to let the hottest hours of the day pass by. Finding a small rocky spot with a little bit of shade was difficult, but not impossible. Sure, they were meant to reach Suna as fast as possible, but that didn't mean they had to risk their neck traveling the desert at its hottest. There was a reason Suna used the desert as a natural defense against invaders. Shinku sat with his back against the rocky outcrop, planting a hook on the wall and another on the ground before using a piece of cloth to form a shadowy area. A few seconds later, and Hanabi dropped next to him, her head down on his shoulder as she decided to catch some sleep. Naruko stared at the scene with wide, shocked eyes. Suzuki actually spluttered in surprise. Kakashi just hummed, flicking through a page of Ika Ika. Umbu always slept in couples. One slept while the other remained awake. Being in teams of 4, it meant that 2 Umbu were always awake during the night. It was that sort of camaraderie, of family feeling. It was what he had wanted his students to learn. Shinku quietly looked with an awry smile towards the rest of his team, and then inwardly sighed. This here is Dragon. Say hello, Dragon. Hello. This here is Bird. Bird is going to be your caretaker and handler, until you get the gist of Umbu work. So I get to teach the rookie, Baku? Wonderful. Listen kid, I'll make things clear. If you want to succeed in Umbu, there's a single rule to follow. Don't die. There, I'm done. The girl snored peacefully. He rolled his eyes, before taking a sip of water out of his canteen. "Ohi," Nariko hissed from her spot. "Shin-chan." Shinku inclined his head to the side, gazing at Nariko, who was flailing her right fist in the air. "What's with the lovey-dovey atmosphere? You have Fu-chan. Do not let your pure love be tarnished by having an affair," Suzuki mouthed towards him. "I'm warning you." He sighed, waving a hand in dismissal. "It wasn't like that." Shinku calmly wetted his hair, before giving a gaze at Kakashi, who returned a silent nod. He closed his eyes too, letting Kakashi have the first watch. He heard a soft rustling near him a few minutes later, which soon became clearer as what felt like two bodies sat down closer to him. He opened his eyes again and raised an eyebrow. Both Nariko and Suzuki were now sitting just a few inches away from him. "So," Suzuki whispered. "How have you been?" Shinku's lips twitched slightly upwards. Kakashi hummed from his spot, gazing with his only eye back to his team for a brief moment. They were making small talk, whispered conversations, and silent gestures. He smiled behind his mask, and then returned to his book. Everything was going to be fine. He had trained them well. Hanabi yawned as she felt a hand touch her shoulder. She cracked her neck lightly and opened her eyes. Bird was gazing at her with a small twitching smile, probably amused by something. She felt happy. She was the second daughter, and although she hadn't been branded the caged bird seal, there was no need, because being a female there was no way she'd split the clan. The suffocating feeling of the Hyuga clan's walls was already starting to grow bitter to her taste. Her father trained her to be the very best. She trained until she spat out blood and fell exhausted on the ground, and when she had grown stronger than her sister she hadn't stopped there. Then, one day, father had simply stopped praising her. It had taken her a while to realize it. It was no longer about her being stronger, but about doing what her father expected her to do. If they told her 100 strikes, and she did 200, her father didn't praise her, because he expected her to do 300. She didn't choose to enter Umbu, her father expected her to enter. Leaving behind the walls, leaving behind the stern gazes of the instructor and the clansmen, she had been scared. It hadn't lasted. She met new people, strange people, different people, quirky people. There was a world out of the walls of the clan compound. She had grown up with the idea that teachers weren't meant to be kind or helpful, but simply there to say a dry good when the exercise was done. "Come on, sleepyhead," Shinku said plainly, offering her a water bottle. "Wet your hair before we depart. The sun's going down, but it doesn't mean it stopped hitting hard." "Hi," she replied. The water felt cool. She used as little as possible, before returning it. Shinku crossed his arms in wait. Hanabi bit her lip for a moment, before applying more water. With a nod, Shinku grabbed the now half-empty bottle and stored it away. They began to travel once more. "Hey, Chibi," Nariko said, suddenly flanking her. "You know Shin-chan got a girlfriend, right?" "Yes," Hanabi replied without missing a beat. Nariko nearly lost her next step on the sand. Then why the hell are you acting like a love-struck fangirl?" "I'm not," she exclaimed back, "I would never." "Shinku-san is, he's..." She looked sideways. "He's a friend." "Well," Nariko blinked. "Then that makes me your friend too then," the girl nodded sagely as she said that. "And Yuki-chan too, I suppose." Hanabi's eyes stared at Nariko in surprise. "But I want to warn you, Chibi," Nariko said quietly, her voice cold. "If there's one thing I hate, it's liars. You better not be one." With that, she sped ahead. "Kakashi nii. Are we there yet?" Hanabi watched the back of the hero of Konoha as she sped up, before biting her tongue and clenching her fists. She had lied. Shinku wasn't her friend. She couldn't consider herself a friend to him after barely 1 month, but she hadn't been able to say the truth, because it was embarrassing. Bird was her hero. It was embarrassing to think about it. She knew it was hero worship, but the man had her back during the war, taught her and knew many things that she didn't. She absolutely didn't have a crush on him, however. She knew he was taken and that was it. Frankly, she had heard about this Fusan person more than one night in a row. She knew she had no chances, not that she wanted one. Therefore, she simply sped up to remain behind Bird's back. She found it somewhat poetic too. Birds had the wings to fly and be free, and on his back, she had found her freedom. She turned scarlet. Maybe she really shouldn't think certain things. How cheesy was that line? Really? Thankfully, she never wrote anything down. Sunagakur came into view as the sun died out over the horizon, the village hidden within a giant hole in the desert and surrounded by rock walls. Yet there were signs of wear and tear, as a few buildings appeared ravaged and destroyed. The shinobi at the gates let them through after a small exchange of passphrase, and they ended up meeting with the Kaze Kage, in the hospital. The man was raggedly breathing, his body literally rotting piece by piece. The medicnin scrambled around like headless chickens, until Suzuki stepped through. "I'm a medic, if you all would please kindly shut the hell up." His hands glowed with green chakra, as he began to examine the rot that spread throughout the Kazekage's flesh. "Are the Konoha shinobi here?" Temari stepped through the door quickly, soon followed by Kankuro. They both closed their mouths as they saw Suzuki operate on their father, silently watching the procedure unfold. "What the?" Suzuki growled. "I need a water basin and a glass jar, now." One of the medics hastily complied, returning it to the Uchiha just as his eyes morphed into the main Jakkyuha. He ground his teeth as his shoulder began to pain him. The water levitated in his hands, which he then thoroughly pushed through the rotting areas. "This isn't poison," Suzuki grunted in effort, his sherry non-spinning. The Uchiha pushed the water, now a murky dark purple, inside the glass jar and held it there with one of his hands as he continued the work only with his right. "It was Sasori of the Red Sand and another shinobi," Kankuro spoke. "I would recognize Sasori's puppetry anywhere," the man grimaced. "They attacked the village and father barely managed to hold back Sasori. The other shinobi defeated Gaara with ease and—" "Not now," Suzuki snarled. "I'm trying to concentrate here." Another murky pool of purple ended up in the glass jar. One more soon followed, after a few tense minutes. In the end, the jar filled with deep purple water stood sealed on the nearby table, as Suzuki exhaled in relief. The jar squirmed. Suzuki deactivated his main Jakkyuha. "Those were bugs," he acquiesced. "Flesh-eating bugs. Nano-sized flesh-eating bugs, to be more precise." The Kazekage's breath became more even, albeit he remained asleep. "We can talk outside," Suzuki continued, "let him rest and whatever you imbeciles," he turned to the other medicnins, "decide to do not open that jar if you value your life." Shinku gazed at the jar for a moment more, before moving outside with the other members of the team and the Kazekage's two remaining children. "If you have anything that belongs to Gaara, we'll be able to track him down with ease," Kakashi said firmly. "I also would be grateful to receive any information about Sasori and the other shinobi." "We didn't see much about the other one," Temari replied. "It was Gaara who found him out. We tried to intervene but, it was simply impossible." "Yeah, they went at it like mad," Kankuro shuddered. "We evacuated the villagers as fast as we could, but it was a close call more than a few times." "Were they wearing black clothes with red clouds?" Kakashi asked. "They attacked at night," Kankuro said, "I have no idea. They had dark clothes, but I wouldn't have been able to recognize Sasori if he hadn't used 100 puppets at the same time." White Fang. A blur of old, gray hair shot forth from the end of the corridor. Kakashi brought up his kunao to parry the blow, just as Shinku and Hanabi both slammed their shoulders one against the other before pushing forward, Shinku with a kunao in hand, Hanabi with her hands ready in the Juken style and her Byakugan active. Naruko was faster, since she gripped the scruff of the neck of the blur's cloak first, and then she threw her backwards with enough strength to make the attacker fly through the entire corridor of the hospital. The small gray blur twisted in midair and landed on the ground on her feet, to reveal an elderly old lady that charged ahead once more. "Ohibaa-chan. What the hell is your problem?" "Stop, Chobasama. He's not an enemy," Temari exclaimed, just as the old lady suddenly stopped. "Oh? Really?" She frowned. "Oh my, sorry. Tee-hee-hee. There was a moment of utter silence. Shouldn't old, mad people be kept sedated? Shinku said calmly. Who are you calling old, you brat? The old woman said, suddenly sounding far more young in her tone. Well, no, you are right, madam. My teacher is old. You're an excavated fossil. I'll let you know I'm one of the most renowned poison creators in all of Sunagakure, brat, Cho spoke, nearing Shinku with a quick pace. Then I'll make sure never to be invited for an afternoon plum tea at the cemetery, Shinku retorted. Why you? Now, Kakashi smiled, there's no need to be this hostile. Sunagakure and Konohagakure are both allied villages. It was an honest mistake. The White Fang was my father. Shinku slowly returned the kunao into storage. Nariko quietly lowered her hands. Hanabi took a step back to remain behind Shinku. Tisk, fine, the old woman snorted. I heard the Kaze cage was poisoned, so I came as fast as I could. It wasn't poison, Suzuki spoke. I took care of it. And who would you be, Tsunade of the Sunin's apprentice? Suzuki retorted. Still a better medic than the headless chickens you had running around your Kazekige's deathbed if I hadn't come along. Ever thought of actually teaching them something useful? Ma, the old woman made a strange face, her mouth wide open just like her eyes. You said something. Are we sure she isn't related to Kakashi? Shinku mumbled. They're both senile in the same way. Kakashi gazed at him for a moment. Ma, you said something. Anyway, I'll be tagging along, Cho said. It's been so long since I've seen my grandson, and you'll need a puppeteer to fight another puppeteer. OHI old lady, you ain't going anywhere. Nariko exclaimed, you'd probably have a heart attack and die. She just dashed across the corridor, Dobe, Suzuki grumbled. I say she doesn't have health problems at all. Ma, if she wants to come along let her, Kakashi shrugged. We'll leave as soon as someone, he gazed at both Tamari and Kankuro, brings me something that belongs to Gaara that my Ninken can sniff. Tamari stiffened for a split second. Of course. Sorry. She flickered away in a small cloud of sand, leaving behind Kankuro who embarrassedly began to explain to Kakashi about Sasori. Shinku calmly unrolled a scroll and poured chakra into it, before summoning forth the bingo book and flicking through the pages. Hanabi peeked from his shoulder. Nariko decided she was going to throttle the bitch if she stood any closer to Shinchan. Just a friend her arse. Suzuki shook his head at the clear signs of anger on the Dobe, before heading over to peek from behind Shinku's other shoulder. He destroyed an entire country, Shinku read the bingo book line twice. He destroyed 1 country. The boy gazed at the ceiling for a moment, before returning to the book at hand. S-rank threat, Master Poison Maker, the bounty on his head ranges in the millions, puppeteer, last seen in Kusagaku in the company of Orochimaru. What? But Orochimaru's dead, right? Suzuki asked warily. Yes, Shinku replied smoothly, he is. On the other hand this means there's a new shinobi who we know nothing about with him. Meh, it's 2 against 2, Nariko shrugged. I can totally deal with one and Kakashi-sensei can deal with the other. And if they're Akatsuki then it will be up to Dad and the honorable perverted master. You're not counting me in, Suzuki deadpanned. Tsunade Bachin said that as a medic, you must always remember your place is in the back, Nariko nodded with a small smirk on her lips. She did say you shouldn't overexert yourself too. Suzuki growled. I'm not weak. No, but you are. Nariko's next words died in her throat as she grimaced. You'll just shorten your time, Yuki-chan. Please, stay in the rear. I'm not going to watch by as an S-rank shinobi tries to kill any member of the team, Suzuki retorted. But if you can manage without my help, I won't intervene. We're 5½ against 2. It's going to be easy, Nariko chuckled. Who's the half? Shinku asked. The Baa-chan here. She's a midget, isn't she? Cho's forehead sported a tick mark. Why, you. Kakashi was grateful when he finally received a long scarf that belonged to Gaara. It meant he could finally stop hearing the constant bickering between Nariko and the old crone. Traveling the desert by night was the exact opposite than traveling it by day. They couldn't waste more time or the trail would go cold, and as Pakun sniffed and began to dash ahead in the sands, the rest of the team followed swiftly. This time however, Nariko gripped Hanabi's arm as they went to slow her down. "Let's have some girl talk, you and I." Shinku gave a quizzical look backwards, only to find himself pretty much in the same situation, but with Sasuke. "Shinku, I need to talk with you." He gave a nod towards the Uchiha, keeping up running but distancing himself together with him to the right of Kakashi. One of the small benefits of being in a desert was that it was easy not to lose someone. There were the dunes and little less to block the view. "What is it?" Sasuke clicked his tongue against his teeth, before gazing at him. "Are you keeping something a secret from me?" Shinku frowned. I know Nariko's hiding something from me. I have no clue." "What did you talk about?" Shinku asked, perplexed. "Why she suddenly wanted to become Hokage," Sasuke retorted. "And why she had to make friends in order to become one." "Oh," Shinku blinked. "I told her the requirement for being considered a Jounin, and when she didn't like what she heard she decided to become Hokage in order to change it," Shinku grimaced. "Unfortunately, I pointed out she would never become Hokage if she didn't actually love the villagers." "Ah," Sasuke actually blinked back. "Only this?" "Yes." "Then why didn't she tell me?" Shinku hummed thoughtfully for a moment. "Maybe because she didn't think it was something important." "It isn't something important," Sasuke muttered. "Ah, I shouldn't have doubted." "Doubted what?" Sasuke blearily grimaced. "I thought you were trying to keep me out of the loop on something important." "Well, we were planning a surprise birthday party for you," Shinku retorted with a small smile. "But well, cat's out of the bag." Sasuke gave him a serious glare. "What? We even had the clown ready." Sasuke's lips twitched upwards. "No balloons." "You're too old for balloons," Shinku rolled his eyes. "On the other hand, maybe." A giant, widespread explosion whitened the sky. The deafening sound, the incredible heat and pressure, the blinding light pushed Shinku backwards as if a giant mallet had hit him with the strength of a titan. His back slammed against a sand dune, throwing him all the way through it and against the other side, where his body rolled on the ground, his vision pitch black. He couldn't see a single thing. He coughed, his hands gripping the sand. If he couldn't see, then Inner couldn't see either. "Switch with me." He obeyed, ending up in the familiar blood-soaked desert as Inner slowly stumbled back up, kunao in hand. Shinku still couldn't see anything, and sounds came to him dull and drowned out. He closed his eyes and breathed, patiently waiting. He could do nothing until he at least had his sight back. He lowered himself down on his knees, letting the sounds wash over him. There had been a giant explosion. The enemy had probably prepared a trap. Since the explosion had come from further ahead than they had been, it meant Pakun had ignited the trap. His bile rose to his throat. On one side, the dog was a summoned creature of Kakashi and was probably safe. On the other, Kakashi had been closer to the explosion than him. Cho had been the one further back, so maybe she had been unaffected by it. Nariko was probably still standing, and since he hadn't heard any sound of a nearby body fall close by, it meant Sasuke had used the Susanoo to shield himself. So, Nariko and Sasuke were up and probably fighting. Kakashi was, in all probability, injured. The rookie had been back with Nariko, so if the girl was standing she probably had shielded Hanabi. However, since he wasn't feeling the Hyuga girl nearby, it meant that she was as blind as him, but hadn't been moved backwards by the blast. Outer relayed all of his thinking to Inner, who carefully and slowly opened his eyes. The night in the desert wasn't dark. The stars twinkled their way as the moon shone down brightly on the sands. The cold breeze of the wind picked up, as the sand clouds lifted in the air. Carefully, Shinku wobbled to the top of the sand dune he had barreled through. Before reaching the top he lowered himself on the ground, crawling the last few meters. He saw the enemy shinobi first, and he paled. 100 shinobi stood on the sands, weapons ready and shining. Up in the air, a dark foreboding dragon was flying. The milky white skin of the giant beast made Shinku's mouth drop open in shock. A dragon? A fucking, frigging, dragon? Dragons didn't exist. They didn't exist and they couldn't be there. It isn't real. Looks fake. Enemy shinobi, wrong forms. Puppets? 1,000 puppets in a giant fake dragon? Sasori has a lot of free time, I bet. Remember, there's 2 of them. Isn't Naruko supposed to summon the Yondaime? Only if they're Akatsuki. Why? Because if they aren't we can die and be done with it. Where was Hanabi anyway? Wasn't she meant to be the forewarning? He'd have a word with her after this was over. She should have kept her Byakugan always active, chat with Naruko or not. His eyes found the rest of the team precisely as he had thought. Sasuke stood kneeling near Kakashi's knocked-out body. From where he was, Shinku couldn't see the degree of wounds while Naruko was standing on all fours and growling out loudly. 4 black chakra tails erupted from her back. Shinku was strangely very glad the blast had sent him off like that. His eyes found Cho holding on to 10 strange things puppets, apparently all out and ready. He was missing Hanabi. She wasn't in the group. New theory, she flew backwards like us, but she wasn't heavy enough to pass through a dune, and she didn't have our reinforced armor, so the blow was stronger on her and knocked her out. Inner gazed sharply around. How could he find the dune the girl blasted through, if the sand closed it off? His right hand clenched. It couldn't be his own, and judging by the trajectory he had ended up following, if Hanabi had followed the same trajectory, but on the opposite side of Kakashi. He slid back down from the dune. He was sure the rest of his teammates could hold off, and Hanabi was his responsibility. Maybe they weren't in Umbu any longer, maybe there wasn't an actual official responsibility towards her, but he hadn't trained with her for a month, he hadn't taught her things for a month, he hadn't talked to her for a month to let her die suffocated in a sand dune. Shinku brought his right hand up in the tiger seal as he neared the possible point of impact. He froze. If he used fire to glass the sand, in the middle of the night, moon or not, he'd be seen. He couldn't possibly dig her out by hand. Think, Outer growled inside his head, kicking the blood-soaked sand that flew in the air. How the hell, wait. He stomped on the blood-soaked sand. Inner opened up his storage scroll, pouring out all 35 water bottles he had on his person. A hand sign, a giant cloud of mist, and then the sand turned wet as he pushed the torrent of water out of his throat with enhanced speed. The sand parted ways in large chunks, the water pouring through the grains and turning the sand solid. During the day, the water would have simply evaporated away, but during the night, the feat was doable. He dug his way through, spitting out a torrent of water and digging with his bare hands, working his way towards the middle of the dune as fast as he could. If Hanabi was unconscious, she probably wasn't going to survive longer than 10 minutes without oxygen. The time it took for him to regain the sight and realize what was going on, he hoped it wasn't beyond 10 minutes. A hand covered in wet sand emerged from the side of the sand tunnel he had created, and hastily Shinku stopped spewing forth the water to grip at it and pulling out Hanabi covered in sand and unconscious. She wasn't breathing. Not on my watch, brat, Shinku snarled, opening her umbu armor and her jacket, going as far as exposing her breasts by slicing open with his kunao her shirt. Not on my watch. Inclining her head backwards, he proceeded to push air into her lungs through his mouth. His eyes sharply moved to her chest, which was expanding and contracting. It wasn't kissing. It was saving someone else's life. Hanabi opened her eyes wide and coughed, turning to the side to puke sand in her lunch. He patted her back and held her hair back as the girl trembled lightly, her eyes filled with tears from the fright. Now listen, Shinku muttered. You stay in here and use the Byakugan to keep an eye on the situation. Whatever happens, do not leave this spot unless we won or we're all dead and the enemy has left, he spoke sternly. I'll go and see if I can help in the battle. Shinku wobbly stood back on his feet. You. Hanabi mumbled, you're wounded. Just a bit of wobbling knees, he replied, nothing much, remember, stay in here. Understood. Hanabi nodded quickly, activating her Byakugan a moment later just as Shinku exited the dune carefully. She blushed scarlet after a few seconds, hastily closing her jacket to cover her inchenchis. Shinku winced. He was already halfway through his chakra reserves. It was truly a wonderful night. He had dug out a teammate from nearly suffocating in a sand dune while repeatedly using the water bullet technique. What else? Oh yes, the two S-rank shinobi who had also knocked out Kakashi were apparently a man capable of controlling a small army and one who could make a giant dragon fly. He was starting to miss the war. Check the description for the links to the author.